Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Scion Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Mighty Deku Had Hive Magic? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Our story starts with two young boys. Izuku Midoriya, a small, green-haired boy with a seemingly weak quirk, immunity to mental influences. It made him immune to mind control and telepathy, but had no other uses. Soma Ichiro, a lanky redhead whose quirk seemingly made things vanish from existence. He would touch an object, there would be a flash, and then the object would be gone. Both boys attended the same primary school, but hadn't interacted before. The first time they had even spoken to each other was at a school camp when they were around 8 years old. It was on that camping trip that Izuku Midoriya vanished, disappearing from the world. Darkness. Everywhere around Izuku was black, no light whatsoever. He seemed to be standing in some sort of liquid, but he couldn't tell what kind. Last thing he remembered, he had bumped into one of his classmates while they were bragging about their quirk. Did he get zapped by it or something? Was he dead? Or was he teleported somewhere? He fumbled around in the dark until he found his backpack, the small bag filled with things like a torch, notebooks, and a Swiss Army knife his mom had given him as a gift for the camp. Flicking the torch on, he found himself in a small cavern, looking naturally formed by the water flowing through it. But that wasn't all. The cavern continued forward for a bit, leading away from where he had appeared. He swept his torch around the room some more and saw something move along the floor. Taking a step towards it, he became intrigued when he saw it was a worm, but white, and larger than any worm he had ever seen before. Now that he had walked forward a bit, he could see a soft green glow coming from a crack in the wall in front of him. Taking a rock from the floor, he smacked the cracked wall a few times, letting out a little cheer as it collapsed open. The gap was only just big enough for him to crawl through, and he dragged his bag through after him. He gasped as he turned away from the wall. He was in a large, arena-like room, the architecture looking alien in nature. There were short pillars dotted on the ground in front of what looked like a stage at the back of the area. But what made him gasp was the enormous light green, glowing orb that was floating behind the area, and the creature that was standing on the stage. As tall as a building, with 3 eyes glowing the same green as the orb and wielding a sword the size of a school bus, Izuku knew that this creature was powerful. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to go back into the wall and never come out, so that he would never have to see this monstrous creature ever again. Thankfully, it seemed like he hadn't been noticed by the creature. Its head drooped slightly, as if it was sleeping while standing. Spotting a doorway to his right, he scurried towards it, wanting to get as far away from the being as possible. Something that big, something that powerful. It shouldn't exist. Eris Morn was not having a good day. Nor was she having a good week, or month, or even year. Her entire being, every resurrection she had, was focused on making sure that the Hive were exterminated from the moon. And she couldn't even say honestly that she knew it was working. They had been on the offensive against the Hive for almost an entire year now, and they just never stopped coming. That was why her fire team was descending into the Hellmouth. To find Crota, the Hive Knight they suspected was in charge of the Hive. There were 6 of them. Herself, Ariana, 3, Vel Tarlo, Saimota, Toland and Omar Aga, all capable and powerful guardians, but even they were falling. Aerys. We need to move, now. We can't stay pinned up here, or we're done for. Aerys snapped out of her musings as Ariana, 3 yelled at her, the sounds of gunshots and Hive magic coming back into her awareness. She ducked under a fireball and fired her hand cannon at the acolyte that threw it, downing it in one shot. Moving her hand out in front of her, she let solar light fill her hand as she threw a fusion grenade into a crowd of thralls, changing targets as she saw them burn. They were in a bad spot. Toland had gone missing about halfway down, Omar had died his final death after a pile of thrall had ripped apart his ghost, and Sai and Vel were wounded. She didn't know how much longer they could last like this. Izuku was startled when he heard it at first. The screeching and the gunshots and the explosions, which he was very familiar with thanks to Kachan. He started to shiver as he heard shuffling around him, but he continued on upwards, towards the gunfire. If there was weapon being fired, it meant that someone was here, and they might be able to help him. He was about to round a corner when he heard someone, a woman he thought, screaming as a loud buzzing noise started. Hugging the wall, he peeked around the corner and saw the strangest thing he had seen in his life. One of those creatures, with a crown-like head made from bone, was floating in the air with what looked like a humanoid robot in its right hand. The left hand was over its face as the creature chanted something in a language that made Izuku's skin crawl. He felt his quirk activate unconsciously, meaning that this chanting had some sort of telepathic aspect to it. Never before in his life had he been more thankful for his quirk than when the creature finished its chanting, and the robot dissolved into blue dust, before even that vanished. Holding in a scream to avoid being the creature's next victim, he scurried over to the nearest wall, searching for another hole. Finding one that looked safe, he dove in and curled up against the wall, trying his best to hold in his sobs. Right before her eyes, Aerys saw her best friend die. She saw the Hive wizard sing a song of death and destruction at Ariana 3 and her ghost, and watched her dissolve before her eyes as she stuffed her fingers even further into her ears to block out the Dmed magic. And as the last remaining guardian of her fire team, with her own light and ghost gone, she ran. She had no destination, she was just running. She felt her prized hand cannon fall from its tattered holster, but didn't care. It wasn't worth going back for. In her panic, she thought she saw a young boy dive into a gap in the walls, but that wasn't possible. Was it? Aerys felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke on her. She was stranded in the depths of the Hellmouth with no communicator, no ghost, no light, and now? No gun. That hand cannon she dropped? That was her only remaining weapon with ammo. Her auto rifle was out, and so was her rocket launcher. She had briefly considered heading back there for it, but with it being so close to Crota's arena, she would probably die before she could even get near it. She had been here for almost a year now and had completely used up her supplies almost 4 months in. Lacking the food that she needed to live now that her light was gone, she had been forced to make a choice. Eat the Hive she killed, or starve. But, even she could say that the mission into the Hellmouth had reaped some benefits. The benefits were not in any way equal to the price paid to get them, but they were something. While she had lost her light, a small crystal she had stolen from a wizard afforded her some manner of regeneration, and she felt like she was starting to understand more about the magic the Hive used. She didn't know why. Maybe it was her close proximity to the crystal she stole? But, she was starting to understand some of what the Hive were saying as they sat and prayed, or what guards were talking about as they watched over a doorway. It wasn't a proper language, more grunts and growls than true words, but she found herself able to listen and understand. Currently, she was listening in on a pair of acolytes as they walked past her current hiding space. They were talking about someone called the Unthinking One, and how another room of thrall breathing pods had been burned by them. Was there someone else down here that was trying to fight the Hive? Could it be Toland? She would have to look into this further. Izuku felt his quirk activate as the Hive started another chant. He didn't know how long he had been in these tunnels, his torch had died a long time ago, his food had run out after that. He had spent many hours scouring the tunnels for safe spaces and materials, and to be honest, he was proud of what he had done. He pushed the rock that hid the entrance to his haven into position and moved to the other end of the cavern. A single green torch illuminated the small space, some of the only light Izuku had found in his time here. He had stolen the torch a long time ago, and it still hadn't gone out. Izuku would have assumed it was someone's quirk, if not for some of his most recent discoveries. He had been panicked for a while upon his arrival in this dark place, scurrying to and fro, searching for food and safety, too busy with survival to focus on anything else. But now that he had settled, and was relatively safe, it gave him time to turn his focus on other matters. Like the fact that he was starting to understand whatever language it was that the creatures spoke. It was a few words at first, or at least, he thought they were words. The occasional pray, or good, or spell, were all that he heard at first, but recently, after he had started trying to understand it more, the words and writings seemed to reveal their meanings to him. During one of his searches, he had come across a room filled with what he assumed to be jewelry, and each piece had glowing green runes etched into it. To his surprise, he was able to translate some of the runes, even if he didn't really like what he read. Some of them spoke of turning the sounds of pain from other creatures into power, some about turning your anger into fire, or reversing injuries through sheer force of will. That was when Izuku realized something. All the talk about spells, the runes, the chanting. He realized what they were doing. He grabbed as many amulets and necklaces and helmets as he could carry silently, and sprinted back to his haven. These creatures were using magic. From the journals of Izuku Midoriya, the Hive species and how to hunt them. Number 1. From what I have seen during my searches of the tunnels, there seem to be around 6 or 7 different types of creatures that live down here, excluding the large one in the orb chamber. First, there are the small, thin ones that don't wield any weapons. From what I can tell, these creatures are called thralls, and they seem to be less intelligent than the other types. On their own, they are practically harmless when taken by surprise, but in a pack, they can be deadly. Tips for hunting: isolate the smallest and slowest, and attack from above. They have hunched spines, making it nearly impossible for them to look directly up. From the journals of Izuku Midoriya, the Hive species and how to hunt them. Number 1. Possibly the most common species of the Hive are the acolytes. More intelligent than the thrall, they seem to be able to take more hits than a thrall can, and are capable of wielding weapons. They are also capable of casting some basic magic, usually in the form of fireballs or to fuel their weapons. Their weaponry usually ranges from blasters, which fire purple bolts of energy, to boomers which fire green explosive shots. Tips for hunting: similar to thralls, they have trouble looking upwards, so attacks from above are preferred. With their ranged capabilities, getting up close is very important. With their magical capabilities, it's good to use ranged weapons on individual targets, and to avoid groups. Aerys froze as she heard it. The sounds of gunfire, screaming Hive, lightning slamming into the ground, throwing sparks down the hallway, and the harrowing noise of unleashed void energy, like static blocking out sound, heat, and light. It was the first time since she had lost her light, almost 7 years ago now, that she had heard the sounds of it being used, and she knew that if she could go to the Guardians using it, she might be able to get out of these godforsaken tunnels. As she moved towards the sounds, she got more and more anxious. She was getting closer and closer, but she knew where she was headed at this point. She had avoided this room for months at this point, as the last time she came near here, she had almost lost her arm. It was the Charmsmith's quarters. The room where the wizards and acolytes of the Hellmouth created their charms and runes for their magics. And apparently there were guardians in there. Arriving at the doorway, she saw an odd sight. 2 guardians were on the ground unconscious, with one standing over both, firing into a crowd of thralls. It was a losing battle. The last guardian ran out of ammo in their magazine, and was swarmed by the thrall, their grenade only buying them a few seconds. And that was when her suspicions were confirmed. Izuku didn't know how long he had spent in these tunnels, but he knew he was much older than when he first got there. He was heading towards gunfire, not recognizing the sounds as Hive weapons, meaning that it was probably someone else. Izuku hadn't seen anyone else in a while. Dressed in clothes made from cobbled-together scraps taken from the few wizards he had killed over the years, he pulled his favorite weapon out, a revolver he had found during his first few days in the tunnels. Chanting in a language he had spent the last 6 years learning, pain spiked up his arm as green light filled the clip as bullets formed. Firing off a few shots as he continued chanting, he watched as the thrall dissolved into green dust as the special bullets did their job. He yelled out a word that clashed with the hearing of everything in the room, and the floor of the entire room in front of him burst into emerald spikes of energy, thralls collapsing into the ground as others were impaled. Feeling the drain of such powerful magic on him, he turned to the trio of people he had just protected, noting the presence of another figure holding a green crystal, and fell to his knees. He looked at the first humans he had seen in 6 years and gave them a small smile as he spoke. "Greetings, Guardians. I'm gonna pass out now, can you get me somewhere safe please?" The last city, Earth. The last place that still stood strong after the collapse. The last place that humanity could survive in their solar system, with the dead traveler floating over their heads. The home of the Lightless, the Guardians, and the Vanguard. "So, I get that Aerys was one of your people at Crota, but do we know who the kid is?" Cade, sat with his feet up on the chair in front of him, spinning his hand cannon, the ace of spades as he leaned back on the chair. To his right sat Ikora Ray, the Warlock Vanguard, and to his left sat Zavala, the Titan Vanguard. Ikora just frowned at him. "Unfortunately, at this moment, we are unsure. The fire team that we sent down to destroy the Charmsmith's quarters reports that he appeared out of nowhere and saved them by summoning green spikes out of the ground. Furthermore, Eris Morn reports seeing traces of other human life in the tunnels during her captivity in the Hellmouth. She believes that this boy might have been down there with her the entire time." Cade let out a whistle. "Oh snap, kid's been down there for what, 6, maybe 7 years? How the hell did he survive for so long?" Zavala huffed. "I believe that it would be fairly safe to assume that this boy is not a guardian. We got some results back recently from some tests that indicate that the Hive have access to a spell or device that can pinpoint our light. If he was a guardian, even a young one, he would have been hunted down almost immediately." Cade just shrugged. "So how did the little sucker survive? And how did he summon those spikes if he's not a guardian?" Ikora shook her head. "Do you know of any guardian that has green abilities, Cade? By now we have to accept that the Traveler's Light is not the only source of paracausal power in this universe." Suddenly, the door to the meeting room slammed open, startling the Vanguard, who all dropped into combat stances, except for Cade, who leaned too far back in his chair and tumbled to the floor. Standing in the doorway, a green crystal illuminating her face, was Aerys. She gave them a small bow, more a dip of her head than anything, and strode into the room. "Greetings, Vanguard," she began. "Ikora summoned me, so here I am." Cade let out a sigh as he jumped to his feet, wiping his hand over his forehead. "Woo! Scared the hell out of me there. You ever hear of knocking?" Aerys looked over at him for a moment, and he got his first good glimpse of her face from under her hood. Where her eyes would be, a black cloth sat over 3 small glowing circles, with a small amount of soft green smoke rising into the air. She gave him another nod. My apologies. One forgets such things when they have more pressing matters to deal with. I have not announced my arrival anywhere in quite a while. Zavala raised his hand at Cade, a silent suggestion for him to drop it. He returned Eris' nod. Greetings, Eris Morn. It is good to have you back after so long. I am sure that you know why we have asked you here. Sitting down, Aerys let her crystal float in front of her on the table and she nodded. Yes, you wish to know about my time in the Hellmouth, and would like for me to give you what I know about the boy that was rescued alongside me. Cade nodded. Yup, got it in one. Gotta say, the kid's causing quite the tizzy up here in the tower, rumors all around about how he survived down there. Stories ranging from him being a human-hive hybrid to alternate universes. Aerys just glanced over at him, and if there wasn't a piece of cloth in the way, Cade would have seen her raised eyebrow. She couldn't tell if he was joking or not. I will begin with what I know for sure, and tell you about my time in the Hellmouth, before moving on to my speculations about the boy. Aerys took a deep breath, steadying herself, before she started to speak. It began when Ariana, 3 asked for my help. Izuku hissed as he felt the light hit his eyes. Quickly placing his hand over his eyes, he patted himself down with the other hand, noting that he had been stripped of his weapons, and was laying on a bed far comfier than the cot he had crafted for himself. Finding the scrap of cloth he was looking for, he tied it around his eyes, the cloth just thin enough to see through, but dark enough to block out the painful amount of brightness that was all around him. He heard someone speaking to him, and was confused at the language they were using. It was an odd mix of languages. It was like someone cobbled together English, Russian, Chinese, Japanese, and a dozen other languages together with duct tape and string. But after mastering the complexities of the Hive tongue, it seemed simple to Izuku. Greetings, child, welcome to the tower. You have been asleep for quite a while. He looked to his right to see someone wearing long robes and a white mask. The man gave him a small bow. My name is the speaker, Mouth of the Traveler. Izuku nodded back to the man as he stretched out his shoulders, grimacing when his right arm flared up with pain again. Izuku Midoriya, sir. If we're doing titles, I guess the Hive used to call me the Unthinking One. Izuku couldn't see it, but the speaker was giving him a curious look. And pray tell, why would that be? Izuku just smiled for a moment, looking down at his hands as he clenched and unclenched them. A story for when the rest of your leaders come to visit, or when they summon me. I think they are called the Vanguard. The speaker nodded. Correct, Mr. Midoriya. If you would follow me, the Vanguard should be ready to see you soon. Izuku put his hand together in a praying motion and nodded, following the man. Thank you, I look forward to meeting them. Ikora looked down, saddened, and humbled by her friend's story. She gave the woman a deep bow, a hand over her heart. I must express my deepest apologies, Aerys, for not finding you sooner. Aerys looked like she was about to argue when Cade spoke up. Ikora, it's not your fault. Everyone that went down there that day was marked Kia. You had no reason to think that she might have needed rescue. He turned to Aerys. On that note, I can see why they call it the Hellmouth. That whole story sounded like a horror movie from before the collapse. Aerys nodded. You are correct with your observation, Cade. The Hellmouth is not a place for the weak or the faint of heart. Which brings me to my next point. Zavala put his hands together, resting his elbows on the table. We must discuss what we will be doing with the child, now that he has shown off an unknown power. We must figure out how he obtained such abilities. Aerys shook her head. No, Zavala, his abilities are not unknown, merely rare and nigh unprecedented. There has only been one other human to use such powers, and he fell to the Hive's corruption. I fear this child may have suffered similarly. Ikora's eyes widened as she realized who Aerys was talking about. Please tell me you aren't talking about Dredgenia. Are you saying that this child wields Hive magic? Cade and Zavala seemed to panic slightly at that statement, before there was a knock at the door. They looked over in surprise to see the speaker enter the room. He bowed to the Vanguard. Pardon the intrusion, Guardians, Aerys. While your theory that he wields Hive magic may be true, I can confirm that this boy is anything but corrupted. He is polite, seems extraordinarily genuine, and in fact, has requested to see you, as he is awake. Zavala nodded to the speaker. That is good. We wish to talk to the boy as well, there is much we need to discuss. Please send him in. The speaker nodded and leaned back through the doorway. You may enter, Mr. Midoriya. Cade had to stifle a giggle when he saw Izuku with the same cloth-covered eyes that Aerys had, knowing that it would be disrespectful. Also Ikora would be sad with him, and that was sort of like disappointing your mother. The boy bowed deeply to the group, giving a small smile. Greetings, Vanguard, I've been wanting to meet you and your people for a very long time. Logically, Zavala knew that this boy wasn't a threat. But as he entered the room, absolutely reeking of death and pain and darkness, he had barely noticed himself activating his Ward of Dawn and pulling out his rifle, leveling it at the boy. He pulled on his light and formed the purple dome around the vanguards meeting table, shocking the others, except for Aerys, who had stood up and backed away from the boy as well. Zavala. And then, as quickly as it happened, he felt the presence around the boy vanish, like smoke in the wind. Aerys seemed to calm down as well, looking visibly shaken as she sat back down. Where the boy stood, there was instead a large black sheet of something, with glowing green edges, something he felt he had seen before. Flashes of Hive Knights hiding behind this very shield filled his mind as it dissipated, allowing the boy, who had somehow gotten hold of a hand cannon, to come into view, gun pointed at Zavala's head. The boy kept his gun pointed at Zavala as he spoke. I have no quarrel with you, Lightborn, but I will defend myself if need be. I came here expecting allies, maybe I should have done more research before assisting the Guardians. Ikora stood up as the Ward of Dawn vanished, leaving purple mist over the table. Zavala, I felt it too, but we mustn't overreact. He has been through a very traumatic experience for an extended amount of time. We need to make his arrival pleasant. It was then that Aerys spoke up, as the standoff between Zavala and Izuku ended, both of them lowering their weapons. Child, you are hurt. Why would you do that to yourself? The rest of the vanguard checked over the boy and noticed the stab wound in the arm he held the hand cannon in, as well as the blood-stained dagger in his other hand. Mumbling something in a language that hurt everyone's ears to hear, the wound closed slowly, and the knife was tucked away into his belt. Power comes from pain, Shattered One, whether it be other creatures or your own. Cade gave the others a glance as they looked as confused as he felt, except for Aerys, who acted like the boy had just imparted some ancient wisdom to them. There was a cough, and the group turned their attention to the speaker, who had sat down at his own seat. Mr. Midoriya, would you care to sit? We would like to discuss some things with you. Izuku complied, grabbing a chair and sitting down on it. He glanced at the vanguard, his eyes lingering on Zavala, before he cleared his throat. Vanguard of the Guardians, my name is Izuku Midoriya. I am here not only for my own goals, but to offer my help and services to the Lightborn. Whatever the vanguard had been expecting, Izuku could guess it wasn't that. Pardon? Did you just offer us assistance? Ikora spoke softly and calmly, but Izuku could almost feel the confusion in her voice. Izuku nodded. Correct, Warlock. As I suspect my fellow survivor has, I offer my knowledge and guidance to you as you endeavor to kill the Hive Prince. Aerys nodded, not seeing any point in denying her own offer of assistance. While I am sure that one day, the Hive Prince would fall even without my help, every day that he lives is a victory for the Hive and a chance for them to grow ever stronger. I intend to help speed the process along. Cade grunted as he put his feet on the floor and leaned on the table, the ace of spades back in its holster. That's good and all, but how exactly do you plan on helping us? Izuku gave him a look, one that Cade couldn't decipher thanks to the cloth over his eyes, and huffed. I theorized that due to my young age you might dismiss me, but I was hoping to be wrong. He pulled out a small book, one that looked homemade. From what Cade could tell, the bindings and leather cover looked like hive skin. On the front was a green rune in the shape of what looked like a V. Opening the book and laying it flat on the table, he spoke a word that sounded like chalk on a blackboard and tapped the holographic device in the center of the table. A glowing green line erupted from the pages and into the device, and it turned on, revealing a hologram of a thrall. It moved as if breathing, and paced up and down the table. Izuku stood up and pointed at it. Do you know how the body of a thrall works? The location of its vital organs, the spots to hit that will deal the most damage. He continued as the hologram changed into the likeness of an acolyte. Do you know the language of your enemy, the way they think, the abilities they have? Another flash, and the hologram changed to a knight, wielding a cleaver that cut down so many guardians on the moon during the Great Disaster. Are you capable of defending yourself from the enchantments and magic that surround the enemy and their weapons? The hologram shifted once more, showing them the Hive Prince himself. The hologram of Crota was crouched down, his cleaver's tip in the ground, surrounded by a faint green glow. Then it shut off, and the lights from the room came back on, showing that Izuku had shut his book, and placed it back, somewhere. He took off the cloth covering his eyes, and the vanguard was able to see that they were a vibrant emerald that seemed to almost glow with determination. Because I do. The Shattered One knows some of what I do, but even she could not stray as far into the dark as I did, as she is not immune to the corruption as I am. Ikora, the first of her colleagues to recover from the enrapturing speech that Izuku had just given, spoke up. And how exactly are you immune to the corruption? We've seen a human using hive magic before, but he eventually lost his mind, and then his humanity. Izuku hummed as he sat back down. It's a long story, and one that you will not believe. Due to a part of my physiology, no telepathic or mental attacks can harm me without me allowing them to. Aerys smacked the table and stood up, her mouth slightly agape as she realized how he had survived in the Hellmouth for so long, even when he was a child. You are immune to the death song, and the whispers of the worms. How did you get such an ability? Izuku nodded, placing his hands on the table. I got my ability when it's called a quirk. Bakugo growled as he completed his 200th push-up. He was not having a very good day. Not only was he subjected to the extras at school waffling on about how they were going to be heroes, even with their D-lister sidekick-level quirks, but he had also been attacked, earlier that day, by a living pile of goop that stank like absolute shit. Standing up and stretching his shoulders out, he looked over to his desk to see if the download for the UA application forms had finished. His eyes briefly looked over the photo on his desk, of an 8-year-old Bakugo with his arm wrapped around the shoulders of his friend, Izuku Midoriya, before he shook his head and focused on the forms. He couldn't F anything up. He had to go to UA. He had to become an awesome hero, one that saved everyone by beating up all the sheetheads that threatened them. He had to become hashtag, and that meant that he had to work extra hard. He couldn't slack off with his preparations for becoming a hero. After all, he wasn't just doing it for himself anymore. He had a promise to keep. Izuku had forgotten how good showers were. He hadn't had the opportunity to clean himself properly for quite a while, the last time being after he discovered a cave pool that the Hive hadn't found yet. After that, 90% of the water sources that he didn't use for drinking water were either filled with thrall or larvae. And while he was fine with eating the Hive at this point, he didn't like the idea of cleaning himself where they slept. So as he was scooted to a small apartment, literally just 4 rooms, a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a small office, he had almost immediately ran into the bathroom to take a nice, long, hot shower. It had taken him turning the nozzle onto the highest pressure it had and the use of a scrubbing brush to get all of the grime and filth off of him, but he didn't regret it. He felt so much lighter now, and with the amount of stuff that had been clinging to him, he might be. All in all, it took him about 30 minutes to clean himself off properly, and in that time, he had apparently been gifted some items, as he found a few parcels sitting on the bench in the kitchen. Looking down next to the bathroom door, he saw a simple set of black briefs and a white dress shirt laid out for him, as well as some black combat boots. He put them on, feeling odd in such good quality clothing after spending so much time in rags, and went over to the bench. There were a few boxes, each with different symbols on them. There was a black crate with what Izuku knew was the Vanguard symbol on it, filled with spare clothes, a writing pad, something Izuku had specifically requested, and some food to fill his fridge. From there, he didn't recognize any of the symbols. There was a black and white box with an odd symbol on it, surrounded by a white circle being orbited by a smaller circle. Putting it to the side for now, he moved on to the next box. This box was a deep blue, emblazoned with a logo that spelled FWC in red, yellow, and white lettering. He briefly wondered what FWC could mean, but put those thoughts aside as he reached for the last, and most fancy-looking, box. Blood red with silver and gold highlights, this box looked like it would fit better in a king's bedroom than a young boy's kitchen. On the top, it was stamped with a white triangle with 3 red lines in the bottom right of it. Placing them all on the floor and poking the button on the front to open them quickly, he peeked out from behind the bench, seeing what would happen. While he wanted to be allies with the other humans, and blue people and robots, he didn't know who sent these packages, so he was going to be cautious. There was a small hiss as the lid opened, revealing soft blue smoke. After a few seconds of waiting where nothing exploded, he walked up to the trio of boxes. The black and white box held what looked like a cape, pitch black and emblazoned with the same logo from the box. Underneath it was a sheet of paper with a message on it. Greetings, Hivebane. We here at Dead Orbit welcome you to the last city, and hope that you enjoy our gift to you. We look forward to your assistance with the current problems on the moon, and your progress with your abilities. Best wishes, Dead Orbit. Izuku checked the other boxes, and found similar contents. The Future War Cult and the New Monarchy along with Dead Orbit seemed to be factions of Guardians and the Lightless that had different values and goals. Izuku huffed as he pulled out the contents of the other boxes. He liked the aesthetic of the scarf hood combo that the New Monarchy sent him, and he liked the fact that there was no cape. He grabbed the rest of the clothes out of the various boxes and put them in the cupboard of his new bedroom. He laid down on the bed they had given him, and marveled at how soft it was. It didn't take him very long to fall asleep, dreaming of a fight between Crota and All Might. It was the best sleep he had ever had. Lord Shax. How you doing, buddy? Listen, I got an idea, but I need your permission for it. Shax gave Cade a deadpan expression as he took his helmet off, having just finished a match in the Crucible. There was an upstart faction that thought they could take him and his Red Guards, so he had gathered the squad and delivered a smackdown that would be talked about for the next few days, at least. He sat down at his desk and sighed. Cade, your ideas are always either semi-illegal, outright illegal, or utilizes some obscure loophole in the rules, making them just barely legal. So out with it, you need my permission, correct? Cade smiled as he sat down across from the Titan, waving at the rest of the Red Guard as they went off to relax. So, you heard about Izuku Midoriya, right? The Hellmouth kid? Shax hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, he caused quite a stir when he arrived. Zavala won't tell me everything, but I hear that he's not exactly a local. Cade shrugged. If Zavala won't tell you, then it's not exactly my place to either. But, and this is completely hypothetical, if there was a person from an alternate dimension that could safely wield Hive magic, would you be interested in helping me train them with firearms? Shax hadn't been expecting that. He knew that the boy was special, as he had been given one of the living quarters in the uppermost section of the tower, one usually reserved for the likes of the faction heads and the speaker. He smiled at Cade. I have to give it to you, my friend. You sure do know how to pique my interest. If he wants to, bring him to me tomorrow. I'll WHP him into shape right quick. Cade jumped to his feet and clapped Shax on the shoulder, smiling. Sweet. I knew you'd say yes, never could resist a challenge, could ya, Shaxy? Shax laughed and clapped Cade back, making the hunter's knees buckle slightly as he smacked him on the shoulder. All right. I got some newbies to oversee, get out of here you scoundrel. Cade ran over to the window and jumped out, double jumping right before he hit the ground to safely land in the courtyard below. Waving back at Shax, he started running towards the Vanguard meeting room, deftly dodging the people in the crowd as he did. Shax just chuckled and started prepping for tomorrow. Izuku was liking the tower. He had spent around 2 or 3 months here already, and was enjoying not having to constantly be alert, fighting, or hiding. At least, whenever he wasn't in the Crucible. He had been a bit surprised when Cade had approached him and offered proper weapons training with him and Lord Shax, but he was glad he accepted it. His little apartment had gotten a few new decorations during his time there, with things like a photo of him, Cade, and Shax standing around his first target with all 10 shots on the bullseye, or the Crucible trophy he got for winning a small tournament. He had filled a few better quality notebooks full of information on the Hive, ranging from how their thought processes worked, to an accurate sketch of their anatomy with highlighted areas for maximum damage. Copies of these had been sent to the Vanguard for circulation to active Guardians, and he was proud to see that there were more and more successful missions into the Hellmouth as time wore on. But his biggest project laid in wait in his office. A ring of stone that he had requested be taken from the inside of the Hellmouth itself. The Hive used it as a sort of a transfer device, allowing them to enter their ships through the portals created by the runes on the ring. But Izuku had a different purpose in mind for it. He had shaved away the runes that told the portal where to go, and had been spending most of his free time reprogramming the destination. But as the portal opened once again, he felt his quirk activate. He sent one of the drones he had been using to test the portals through it, and saw a glittering palace hallway through it. Standing in the middle of it was what looked like one of the blue-skinned people, the Awoken Izuku thought they were called. She tapped on her head and made an X with her hands, and Izuku understood as his quirk pulsed again. Slowly, just in case he needed to put it back up quickly. He turned his quirk down, allowing the presence of another to enter his mind. He kept it on slightly, only to protect himself from corruption, but allowing speech. You are a truly interesting being, Izuku Midoriya, to be able to punch through the barrier and forge a path here without prior knowledge of this place. Izuku shivered as he heard the voice enter his mind. It felt like someone was rifling through his mind, searching for answers. It seemed almost confused when it was unable to, due to Izuku's quirk. Truly fascinating indeed. Well then, on to business. What brings your gateway to the dreaming city, oh, visitor mine? Izuku shivered at those words. Even with his quirk shielding him, he could feel the power behind them, as if the words alone could tear apart reality and put it back together again. And with his own abilities, the way that he casts his magic, he knew that was entirely possible. To my knowledge, not even the Vanguard and the Guardians are aware of this place. So how does a child fumbling around with Hive runes have the luck and willpower to punch through one of the weak spots in my protective barrier? The blue-skinned woman chuckled, but it looked wrong. It looked like someone was piloting the body like a puppet on a string. And Izuku swore that he could see something lurking in the shadows behind the woman. Izuku faced a dilemma. His drone didn't have a speaker on it, so he couldn't communicate with whoever this was, or at least the thing in control of the body. Which meant that to speak with them, he would have to enter through the mysterious portal. His curiosity had been piqued. This thing was powerful in a way that no guardian he had met was. It spoke as if it knew reality could not hold it. He could just poke his head through and take a peek. Movement. He saw it on the camera just before he stepped into the portal. A large dragon creature, or at least its face, came into view as he slammed his quirk to full blast, the blue-skinned figure vanishing like smoke in the wind. His quirk pulsed as the drone picked up loud noises, and he could see that the giant dragon thing was chuckling. That was the closest thing Izuku could think of. Using his datapad, he took a photo of the runes he used to get there, and flexed his will on it as he made a fist, closing the portal. His quirk silenced immediately as he left the office in a hurry, looking for a drone with a communication module. "You wanted to see us, sir?" Nizu nodded as he waved Aizawa into the meeting room. Midnight came in behind him and sat to his right, with Present Mike on his left. "Yes, please, sit down everyone. We have 2 things on our agenda for this meeting. And as usual, everything in this meeting is a secret of utmost importance. Please look in the drawers of your table for an NDA to sign." This was a standard procedure for meetings at UA. Shota couldn't even remember how many NDAs he had signed after becoming a hero, there were just so many of them. He grabbed the document and signed at the bottom before handing it to Nizu and sitting back down. Once everyone was done, Nizu spoke up. "Wonderful. For our first order of business, we will be discussing our new staff member this coming year, All Might, and some accommodations we will be making for him." Shota grunted as he glanced over to the man. While he at the very least respected All Might for his work as a hero, the amount of effort he had dedicated, he hated the fact that he played in the spotlight so much, making it harder for underground heroes such as him to avoid the media. And now they were going to be making accommodations for him. That probably just meant that he was going to basically pop in whenever he wanted, say a quick speech that most probably would distract the kids from actual learning, and leave again, making his job even harder. Or at least, that's what he thought before All Might, the strongest hero to ever live, the symbol of peace and justice, deflated. Like a balloon. Just, poof. On complete instinct, as his conscious brain was still reeling from the reveal, his head snapped over to glare at Hisashi and activated his quirk, saving everyone in the room from a scream as loud as a jet engine. Instead, they got a regular scream. "What the F, All Might?" Shota glanced around the room and saw similar expressions of surprise on everyone's face except for Nizu's, which had a look of smug satisfaction. The DMN rat probably either figured it out years ago, or was there when it happened. There was panicking and chaos from the staff for a few more minutes before Nizu eventually got them all to calm down. All Might explained that he had been injured in a fight against a villain 6 years ago, and only had about 3 hours a day of hero work available to him. And boy wasn't that a surprise. All Might, the man that Shota thought didn't take heroics seriously enough, had lost a lung while fighting a villain, and still kept up his persona as an invincible pillar, even to the detriment of his own health. While he wouldn't admit it, his respect for All Might had increased. It took a little while, but eventually they moved on to the next topic of discussion for the meeting. He even had to sign another NDA, as this was apparently a totally different secret. Pulling up a map of UA's campus with a few red dots placed in random locations, Nizu started talking. "Over the last few weeks, our sensors have been picking up spatial anomalies on campus grounds and in the surrounding area, specifically the Mustafu area. We are currently unaware of the cause of these anomalies, but they seem to be centered on small puffs of floating black and green smoke. It is fairly safe to assume that this is the result of a quirk in action, but so far, we have not been able to find anyone with a matching quirk in the database." Taking a sip from his cup of tea, Nizu sighed. "We are continuing to investigate these anomalies, but I am hereby ordering you to report any sightings of the black and green smoke so that we might find a way to see where they come from." They talked for a bit longer about the anomalies, and All Might's injuries, eventually moving on to small talk as the meeting ended. And while it was just the smallest thing, his gut was going haywire over the spatial anomalies. Something told him that this year would be filled to the brim with problems. And problem children. Banshee. 44 looked up and saw one of his favorite customers running towards his little stall in the tower courtyard. Even with his somber and to-the-point way of talking, Izuku Midoriya had still wormed his way into his heart. He squirmed his way past a pair of arguing titans and reached his counter, flashing him what Banshee guessed was meant to be a smile. He didn't have the heart to tell the boy that it looked like he was grimacing in pain. "Hey kiddo, how'd that drone I gave you hold up during your tests?" He had a suspicion that Izuku wasn't using the drone he had given him for piloting practice, but at this point, most of the citizens of the tower knew not to dig too deep into what Izuku did in his quarters, after an event with an overzealous reporter. Izuku gave the weapon's MSTR a bow. It did wonderfully, Mr. Banshee sir, but I was wondering if you had another model you could allow me to borrow? Preferably one that is equipped with a communications module. Banshee raised one of his mechanical eyebrows at that. Izuku wanted to be able to talk through the drone? I got a few out back, kiddo, what do you need it for? He noticed the way that Izuku flinched at that and quickly followed it up. Not that I need to know or anything, kiddo. I got one you can borrow, but you gotta give the old one back. Izuku nodded and brought out the old drone from his coat. I have it here with me, Mr. Banshee sir. Here you go. Handing the boy the new drone, he watched him scurry off back to his apartment to do who knows what. Turning to a hunter as they approached his countertop, he pushed thoughts away from the strange boy and his odd habits. Odd kid, reminds me of DMN. Who does he remind me of? Izuku spoke, and the portal reopened. Activating the drone, he connected it to his datapad and flew it through the portal. The video connected and he was met with the smiling face of the creature. Lowering his Quirk's defenses slightly, he spoke into the drone's microphone. Creature. Speak your name and reveal to me what you are. There was a chuckle from the dragon thing before he heard the soft, powerful voice in his head again. Greetings to you, young one, it is good to officially meet you. My name is Riven of 1,000 Voices, and I am an Ahamkara. Izuku could feel the importance of her sentence, somehow knowing that he was incredibly privileged to be privy to her species. And what does that mean, Riven of 1,000 Voices? How does a creature as powerful as you find yourself in such a hidden place? Riven chuckled, and it slowly built up to a full-blown laugh. I see you are unaware of the circumstances surrounding us, Ahamkara. Sit, child, and allow me to regale you with a tale of wishes, guardians, and the most powerful prey that has ever existed. Cade was starting to get worried for the kid. It started about 2 months ago. Izuku had stumbled into their weekly training session mumbling about wishes, and portals, and a place called UA. He had then been distracted the entire session, asking Cade and Shaxx questions about places that the Guardians had confirmed strong enemies were located. There were a lot of requests to sit in on a strike's comms channel and learn how they functioned, and while some were classified and therefore hidden from Izuku, when a strike concerned either the Hive or the Hellmouth, he was allowed to listen in, and occasionally give suggestions. And then there was the rapid growth in the boy's strength. Izuku had always been a pretty strong person, years of living in the Hellmouth had shaped his body into a weapon, with sleek, corded muscles built for speed and agility, but he, like all other lightless people, were limited to what their bodies could create. But Izuku was starting to push past that. Every other session he would show off some feat of strength, like lifting a rocket launcher a little easier, or throwing a grenade further than what was normal. And he seemed to realize it too. Whenever he was able to pull one of these things off, he would cheer and end the lesson early, heading back to his living quarters, a place that no one was allowed to, or nowadays wanted to, enter without his permission. But recently, when Ikora had gone to see him to ask about a certain target of a strike, she found that the minute she reached his door, her connection to the light was pressured. Her ghost, Ophiuchus, reported that it was similar in feeling to the zones in strikes where her ability to resurrect Ikora was compromised. And while the Vanguard was fine with Izuku doing a lot of things, having a dark zone in their base of operations, no, their only home, was not an acceptable thing for Izuku to do. There was only so much they could hide from people like the Praxic Fire, and Izuku was pushing it. That was why Cade found himself standing in the lobby out front of Izuku's room with Zavala, Ikora, Aerys, and a squad of the Vanguard's finest, ready to burst into the room. Zavala was up front briefing everyone. All right, everyone. We do not know if this dark zone is intentional or not, and Mr. Midoriya has shown no intent to harm any of us, but we need to investigate this anomaly in his behavior. He sighed. If you spot the target, immobilize and restrain, but do not cause him any pain. His abilities stem from his pain, meaning that any damage you do to him will just power him up. Our best course of action is to attempt to knock him out if he reacts violently. Cade bristled slightly at the way Zavala was talking about Izuku. Calling him the target, like he hadn't spent the last 5 months making sure the kid had everything he needed for his integration into the last city. Zavala slammed his fist into his palm. But if he is not aggressive, you will take no action against him, am I clear? If Mr. Midoriya shows no signs of harmful intent, you will stow your weapons and leave. That is a direct order. Getting nods and yes sirs in response to that, Zavala let his ghost fade away and pulled out his auto rifle, before moving to the door. Shivering slightly at the feeling of his light being strained, he held up his hand and knocked on the door, only to find it swing open, unlocked. A dozen guns were immediately pointed at the doorway and Zavala dove to the side, but when nothing happened, they were lowered. Entering the doorway behind Zavala, Cade rested his hand on the ace of spades, ready for anything. Or so he thought. The team cleared the entire living quarters except for Izuku's office, where he was most likely to be. One of the hunters behind him activated their shadow shot, pointing the bow at the doorway, just in case. So when Zavala pushed the door open and Izuku wasn't in it, they were all surprised. What was in the room was empty boxes of ammo, an empty storage container for a hand cannon, a map drawing table with scans from Guardian's patrols of the moon, and the giant stone ring they got for Izuku in the back of the room. But what was the most shocking of all to them was the fact that the portal was active. Izuku couldn't remember a time that he was having as much fun as this. An odd and admittedly morbid thought to be having as you crush a thrall's head under your boot while simultaneously ripping an acolyte's head off, but it didn't matter to him. The creatures dying in front of him proved that he would be able to fulfill his wishes through his own strength, and that made him smile. Whipping out a top-of-the-line hand cannon that Banshee had gifted him, he felt bad for stealing it, but Banshee wasn't gonna remember. He fired one shot into another acolyte's chest, and pulled on the immense pain it was feeling to conjure an orb of fire in his hand, throwing it at an oncoming knight. All around him were the screeches and grunts of the Hive tongue, spewing insults and jeers at him. He wondered if they knew he could understand them. Then he heard another of the knights charging him, and used the thrall below him as a launching pad, jumping over it. Firing multiple shots off into its back, he slid under the swing of its cleaver and pulled out his knife from his belt, stabbing it into the flexible part between its chest carapace and its head. Sliding from its right to left quickly, he slit the knight's throat and watched it fall, summoning a shield from its suffering right as a wizard started to attack him. He pulled harder on the knight's pain and attempted something he had only tried 1 or 2 times before. He had seen the way that the Hive ships traveled long distances and had overheard how it worked, and now he was going to try it. Shooting another acolyte and pulling its pain as well, Izuku forced his will on the world around him, and moved his arm forward, knife in hand. The air in front of him shimmered in black and green light as a hole in space erupted into being. His knife sank into it and stabbed into the back of the wizard's neck, but he had to pull his hand out as the portal started closing. He growled. He needed to be stronger before that strategy could be viable. He could hear the wizard screaming obscenities, or the equivalent, at him, and smirked. Diving out from behind the shield as it faded away, he shot the wizard in both of its shoulders, leaving the arms limp. Walking up to the wizard, he pulled it to the ground and stuck a knife to its throat. He growled at it as he checked around him for more enemies, but this room was now empty. As he looked around, the wizard was screaming at him. "Filthy human! Death will come to you, as it does to us all, you small, puny creature. You will fall." Izuku roared as he slammed the wizard's head into the floor, stopping its words. He growled at it, smirking. "You are not one to talk, spellslinger. You have failed in the eyes of reality by being weaker than your opponent. You are no longer fit to live." Izuku took pleasure in the look of surprise, which was an odd expression on a Hive's face, at the taunt right before he stabbed it in the eyes, digging deep enough into it to tear apart its brain. Now that everything around him was dead, he headed back to the portal that sat at the smaller end of the room. As he did so, he gathered up all of the bodies of the Hive and placed them in a pile. The knights and wizards took a while to drag over, due to their immense density, but he got them all piled up eventually. Sitting down in front of the pile with a knife in one hand, he started to hum as he cut along his palm. Placing his bleeding hand on the pile of corpses, his humming slowly turned into chanting. "Through strength comes power. Through power comes victory. And through victory comes strength. Look upon my foes and find them vanquished." A blazing green fire sparked into existence inside the pile of corpses as Izuku chanted, unaware of his surroundings at this point, including the portal behind him. "I ask you to fill me with their strength, having earned that right by triumphing over them. Grant unto me the power of my enemies, who can no longer use it. Allow their death to fuel my life, and award me their power. Through the sword, I grow ever stronger." The green fire burned even brighter, encompassing the entire pile as the corpses started to disintegrate. As they did, the ashes started to coalesce into an orb above the pile. As the last of the ashes joined into the now apple-sized orb, it fused together in a brilliant flash of light, now a glowing green orb. Izuku reached out to grab it, feeling the heat of the power in his hands and smiling. He stood up, his incantation now complete, and turned back to the portal. Then he jolted in surprise. Standing just in front of the portal was the Vanguard and Aerys, with various guardians filing in behind them slowly. Aerys's eyes were firmly planted on the orb in his hands, while the guardians were sweeping the room. They seemed confused that there were no Hive in there. Cade's eyes finally reached the orb in Izuku's hand, which was slowly losing its green glow, the glow appearing in Izuku's eyes instead. His hand instinctively jerked towards his holster, but he was able to stop himself from drawing his ace out. Instead, as the last of the glow vanished from the orb held by Izuku, he took a slow step forward and raised his hands, clearing his robot throat. Hey there, kiddo. Sorry to surprise you like this. Izuku just ped his head to the side. While he was confused at why they were here, he wasn't upset at them. He had guessed that the aura that the various magic objects he had in his quarters would eventually lead to an investigation. He said as much. Calm yourself, Cade. I hold no anger towards you. Truly, I expected an outcome like this to happen eventually. But I do have a few questions for you all. Zavala, who had joined Cade now that the room had been secured, coughed into his hand. And we have some for you, Mr. Midoriya. How about we head back to the tower so that we may speak in safety? Izuku jolted as he realized that they were still in the Hellmouth and quickly nodded. Agreed. I do not wish to spend longer than I need to in this place. Everyone. You may re-enter the portal and return to the tower. A few guardians looked at each other before looking to Zavala for permission, who nodded. They shrugged and walked back through the portal with varying levels of confidence. Izuku was fairly certain he could even see one shivering. As Izuku followed Cade back into the portal, Aerys walked up beside him. He looked at her with a raised eyebrow. What can I do for you, Shattered One? Aerys hummed. During my time in the Hellmouth, I discovered a text written in a language I understood that explained in great detail the concept that fuels the Hive's strength. The tome called it Sword Logic. Izuku glanced at her quickly, recognizing the book she was talking about. It was one of the first that he wrote, and the one that he had lost. If Aerys had it, that meant he might be able to get it back. It spoke of gaining strength by defeating your foes. It spoke of forcing your will on reality through that strength. I believe you to be the author of this book and a practitioner of this logic. Am I correct, unthinking one? Izuku chuckled softly at the title as they reached his living room, now alone with Aerys and the Vanguard. You are correct, Shattered One. No, Aerys. You are correct, Aerys. I ventured down into the dark once again to gain strength, so that I may complete my plans. He sat down on his couch and willed the portal to close. The Vanguard looked around as the pressure of the darkness lifted off of them, visibly relaxing. I need to be stronger than I am to help my allies, and I need to be stronger than I am now to return to my home. He clenched his fist and stared out the window at the city below him. I've always wanted to be a hero, did you know that? It's a common profession in my homeworld. So if I need to grow more powerful to protect people, I will, and nothing will stop me. He bowed to the Vanguard. If the aura that fills my home when I activate my portal makes you uncomfortable or afraid when you come near, I can add a mechanism to my door to show when I am using it, so that you may avoid it. Is this acceptable? Zavala looked at Ikora with his eyebrow raised. Waving Cade and Aerys over, then had a brief discussion while huddling, before they seemed to reach an agreement. We have reached a decision. As it has been shown that the Dark Zone is an unfortunate side effect of your travels, and you need to travel to gain strength, we agree to your request. We will send either Banshee or one of his assistants over to install the device. Izuku just smiled at him and nodded. Zavala continued. But please, keep the portals to a minimum while you know there are others around. We can only protect you from so much, there are many people who would try to hurt you if they knew what you could do. Izuku nodded to them, and after a brief moment, the Vanguard left, followed shortly by Aerys, who bowed slightly to Izuku before leaving. As Izuku closed and locked the door, he felt shifting around his neck. He pulled at the collar of his battle outfit and allowed the worm-like creature to unwrap from around his neck. He walked back to the portal and adjusted the coordinates, reopening it. Holding his palms up, the worm slid down his sleeves and curled up on his hand. He smiled at it. Did you enjoy your outing? You mentioned that it wasn't safe to reveal you to the Guardians, but they are gone now. The worm creature chuckled before shuddering, dropping to the floor and growing in size and shape, and before Izuku appeared an awoken woman. Or at least, the image of one. Riven chucked as she leaned against the portal. Yes, I did, oh, transporter mine. It has been too long since I have spent that much time outside of the Queen's city. I must thank you for the opportunity. The Queen doesn't let me leave very often. She laughed. How fortunate for both of us that you stumbled across my abode. I will return home now. Rest yourself, child, and I shall see you at a later date, oh, distraction mine. Izuku bowed as Riven walked through the portal. I will. Enjoy your time until then, my friend. They didn't know it, but as Izuku closed the portal, they had the same thought. What an interesting creature. Izuku awoke to nausea in his stomach. He was needing to sleep less and less these days due to the power he had been amassing, but he hadn't reached the point where he could go without it forever. It wasn't like he didn't enjoy sleeping, but he had so many things he would rather be doing than resting, even if it was important. He had so many plans, so many things to do. But he had never woken up like this before. He could feel his pressure building all around him, rising from the floor and through the roof, making him shiver as it passed through him. He grabbed some clothes, just a basic outfit consisting of black briefs, red boots, a white shirt, and a blue hoodie, before running outside to see a gathering of guardians in the courtyard of the tower. And then he saw what was making him feel nauseous. Looking up into the sky, it was almost like the traveler, the source of the guardians' powers, was glowing with life. Izuku could feel the strings in between the giant white orb and the guardians, flooding everyone in the courtyard with energy. And then he saw the stage at the front of the crowd, where the Vanguard was standing, alongside a group of 6 guardians. He pushed his way to the front of the crowd, finding it surprisingly easy, as many of the guardians seemed distracted. It seemed like Zavala was happy with the number of people gathered in front of him, because he fired a shot into the air, gaining their attention. Greetings, to both guardians and the lightless. Today is a momentous day. One that we shall keep in our history books as the first time we scored a proper victory against the enemies of the traveler. Today, the Vex Mind, 8 Heian of the Vault of Glass, has fallen. At this, the crowd gathered in front of Zavala went wild. Even Izuku was stunned. From the scouting reports that he had gotten to look at, the Vault of Glass was a major stronghold for a race known as the Vex, which were basically Isaac Asimov's nightmare. This 8 Heian apparently had the ability to control time inside the vault and had used it to try and restore something called the Black Heart, an odd force of the darkness that had been dampening the traveler's power. Izuku didn't know everything about the other enemies that the Guardians faced. His speciality was the Hive and their magics, of course, but even he knew how momentous an occasion this was. The group of 6 Guardians stepped forward and pulled their ghosts out, letting them hover over their shoulders. Zavala clapped the one closest to him, a Titan, on the shoulder as he continued his speech. And we have these 6 Guardians to thank. They raided the Vault of Glass and succeeded where many others have failed. Introduce yourselves, our champions of the hour. The group consisted of 2 of each of the classes. There were 2 Titans, one in pure black armor with green highlights, the other in armor with hack camo on it. Izuku could feel void energy coming off of the one in the green and black armor, and solar energy from the hack one. They both seemed powerful and full of light. The 2 hunters were both dressed in identical sets of armor, but one had a pink cloak while the other had a brown one. From what Izuku could tell, they were both female, the slight curve in their armors tipping him off. The brown-cloaked one emanated void energy, while the pink-cloaked one let off the occasional spark of arc energy. The 2 warlocks seemed to vary on how interested they were in this ceremony. One of them, the female warlock, who had some of the most expensive-looking gear on he had seen on a guardian, seemed to be soaking up the cheers, while the male warlock, who was in red and white crucible gear, seemed to just want to leave already. The one in the black and green armor seemingly noticed how uncomfortable the red and white warlock was, so he waved him up first. The warlock visibly sighed and stepped forward, taking off his helmet. The first thing that Izuku noticed was the man's heterochromia, one eye being vibrant blue, while the other was a dull gray. He bowed to the group, putting on a shaky smile. Hello. My name is Shoto Toei Reisho, Solar Warlock. He then stepped back quickly and almost hid behind the black and green Titan, who laughed, waving the next person forward. Apparently he wanted to be last. The pink-cloaked hunter stepped up first, taking off her helmet with a flourish, revealing her fluffy brown hair. Hey everyone. The name's Mina Sando. I'm a blade dancer. If any of y'all want to learn some of my moves, I'd be happy to teach you. The other hunter stepped forward and took her helmet off, placing her hand on Mina's shoulder. She had short brown hair and a bob cut, and Izuku could see her blush even from where he stood. Alright, chill Mina. Hello everyone. My name is Uraraka. But feel free to call my Yura, everyone does. The black and green Titan waved the only other member of the fire team forward after you stepped back, taking Mina with her. The cream-colored helmet hissed as it came off, revealing a head of spiky blonde hair and crimson eyes. Izuku's entire world stopped as he saw the Titan's face. Could it really be him? Izuku hadn't even considered the possibility of this happening. He had never anticipated that something like even could happen. But he should have. He should have expected something like this. The blonde smirked as he let solar fire coat his body, raising his arms into a victory stance. Sup, fuckers. The name's Katsuki Furia. Don't you FING forget it. I'm gonna beat everyone else and become the next Titan Vanguard once the Smurf bites the dust. Izuku barely heard the cheering from the crowd as he took a step forward unconsciously. Guardians, too distracted by the loud, abrasive blonde to care, moved out of his way as he reached the front. Zavala saw him and smiled, nodding towards him, before noticing the blank look on Izuku's face as he stared at Katsuki. The Titan in question had seemed to notice Izuku as well, eyeing the boy as he slowly approached the stage. Katsuki was a little surprised, not that he would show it. The kid that had just pushed his way through the crowd and was now staring at him was a dead ringer for his fireteam leader if he was less buff and like FING 12 years old. He nudged the green and black titan, nodding his head at the kid, who still hadn't taken his eyes off of Katsuki. Heads up, dumbass. The little twerp at the front won't stop staring at me. Is that the one Zavala told us about? The Hellmouth kid? The green and black titan hummed, before placing his hand on Katsuki's shoulder. I think it is. I hadn't seen him before. He looks just like me. You thinking what I'm thinking? Katsuki grunted and nodded, taking a step back after rearing the crowd up again. The green and black titan stepped forward, taking off his helmet. He noticed that the Hellmouth kid's eyes immediately left Katsuki and jumped to him, the kid's mouth falling open as he stared at him. He raised his fist into the air and smiled at the crowd, blowing a piece of his fluffy black hair out of his eyes. Greetings everyone. It is an honor to stand before you and be able to proclaim success. My name is Akatani Mikumo, and I am the fireteam leader for the mighty Hydras. Flashing a smile to the crowd, his vision eventually landed on the boy again, who was staring up at him with sparkling eyes, even if the rest of his face was blank. Tonight, we will be hosting party to celebrate this victory, complete with a mighty feast, fit for the kings of the golden ages. The cheers that erupted did nothing to distract him from the look that the boy that could well be his younger self gave him. Full of curiosity, concern, and excitement. Izuku could feel it in his bones. This man was him. Well, not exactly him, but close enough that the seams of reality that permeated the small hallway they were standing in were stressed, as if their being together was something the universe couldn't understand. His body was yelling at him in confusion, giving the motherlode of all mixed signals. He was hot, cold, afraid, confident, at ease, and stressed out of his mind. He leaned up against the wall and shivered involuntarily. Mikumo looked just as stressed out, and Izuku knew that the man could feel the unease as well. They were like two halves of a whole that were broken and had been remade, and they didn't fit together anymore. Izuku used the power of the sword logic and the darkness. Mikumo was a stalwart defender empowered by the light. Izuku was a stranger from another dimension, and Mikumo had been born and raised, killed, and then reborn in this reality. This went on for a while, the sounds of the party going off in the background as the two-dimensional doppelgangers stared at each other. After a few minutes though, Mikumo spoke. So, you're me? How old are you? Izuku knew that Zavala had briefed him a little bit about his situation, but if it didn't include his age, then Mikumo probably didn't know much about him. He hummed, then spoke. Yes, I am your doppelganger. I am 14, and will be turning 15 in 3 months. Mikumo nodded, and the two fell back into silence for a short while. It seemed that neither of them really knew what to say now that they had the privacy needed to for a top-secret talk. Izuku hummed, allowing some green energy to weave around his fingers, like a gambler would a coin, as he waited for Mikumo to speak. Mikumo's eyes flicked to the energy instantly, and Izuku could feel the light from him flare up a bit. Mikumo calmed down after a second, looking the boy in the eyes again. You're an enigma to me, honestly. I don't know whether I want to shoot you, hug you, or send you as far away from me as possible. Izuku nodded. I understand. I feel the same unease you do, Lightborn. But I asked Zavala to bring you here to speak with me for a reason. Mikumo nodded. Sure, I'll just ignore it. What did you want me for? Izuku pulled out a small green stone from his pocket, and passed it to Mikumo. The Guardian gasped as he felt his connection to the light become tense. What is this? Izuku made a pulling motion and the rock flew back into his hands. Earlier today there would have been enough ambient darkness in that ritual stone to render you lightless upon contact. Now, after your victory, it barely suppresses it. Izuku continued, pocketing the rock. You Lightborn may be distracted by the new strength of the traveler, but I can feel the struggle of the dark in the city. Mikumo raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Izuku hummed. My magic has become more difficult to bring out since your victory in the Black Garden. The last city has become a light zone once more, where the powers of the dark are weakened, similar to how the Hellmouth affects guardians. Mikumo smiled widely. Really? That's amazing. I knew that the traveler was starting to heal again after we defeated the Black Heart, but I didn't realize that it would affect it that much. Izuku's mouth curled up slightly. Yes, you have won a great victory for those in the light, Mikumo. And it is because of that victory that I stand before, asking for your help. Mikumo took a moment to comprehend those words, before letting out an eloquent, huh? Izuku nodded to the man. In 10 days, I will be leading an expedition into the Hellmouth to kill the Hive Prince. I know the ins and outs of the sprawling caverns better than anyone, even she who is shattered. Izuku raised his cloth-covered eyes to the man's face, and smiled at him. I wish for the mighty Hydras to accompany me on this expedition. Cade was getting antsy. Izuku had been going through his portal at least once a day for the last 9 days, and each time he returned, Cade could almost feel the growth in power that Izuku had experienced. Just how strong was this boy going to get? But that's not what made him nervous this time. This time, he was nervous because Izuku brought something back with him other than increased strength. This time, Izuku had brought back a FING hive larva. Izuku, buddy, pal, sport. What are you planning on doing with that worm? You're not gonna eat it and become immortal or something, right? Izuku chuckled as he played with the worm, allowing it to fall off of one hand and land in the other, repeating this. I do not plan on eating it, no. One larva would not be enough to gain immortality, anyway. As Cade gave him a look that definitely said, that's not helping, Izuku continued. I plan on using this worm to grow a weapon for me, like the wizards do for their troops. Something that will allow me to better use my magic. Cade nodded, stroking his robotic chin, and letting out a hum. I see. So like one of the cleavers that the knights use? Or are you thinking of a more traditional wizard staff? Izuku shook his head. No, neither of those. A cleaver, or a greatsword as they would be for me, requires too much mastery of techniques to allow for effective combat, but a staff would leave me without much offense if I ever lost my connection to my magic. Izuku's eyes glowed, and he spoke a word that made Cade flinch. A green light engulfed the worm, before Izuku placed his other hand around it. And then he squeezed. His enhanced strength made it easy to do, so easy that the worm practically popped like a balloon, the green gunk that made up its inside spewing out of it, before suddenly it stopped in mid-air, and floated slowly back to Izuku's hand. Cade took his hands off of his eyes now that they weren't in danger of getting hive gunk on them, and saw Izuku mumbling as he moved his hand up and down the floating remains of the worm. He watched in fascination as the pile of hive gunk split into 2 sections, and started to compress into themselves, becoming solid under the strength of Izuku's magic. Eventually, Izuku's mumbling stopped. A second later, there was a flash of green light from both of the items being formed, blinding Cade for a moment. And then he saw them. The weapons that Izuku had forged from the worm. Dual shortswords, with blades as deep and black as the night sky, and handles made from the bone-like substance that made up the hive's exoskeleton. They were appealing. And they were dangerous. Izuku smiled as he grabbed both of the hilts, and brandished the swords. Cade watched as Izuku moved through katas and forms that he was sure no one in the tower had shown him. Izuku, what did you just do? Izuku looked up from his movements to see Cade staring at him, or more specifically, at his new blades. He smiled. I forged a weapon from the darkness inside the worm, Cade, dual blades that will complement my magics and allow me to fight in hand-to-hand combat more effectively. Cade nodded, finally tearing his eyes away from the swords. He gulped. Or the robot equivalent of gulping. You should make scabbards for them as quickly as possible, Izuku. Just seeing the blades made my light arc up like a pitbull seeing a mailman. Izuku nodded. I hypothesized that they might make Lightborn uncomfortable to be around due to the purity of their darkness, so I already have scabbards ready for them. Allow me to get them from my study. Izuku then left the room, returning a few moments later with a pair of appealing bone-like scabbards connected to a belt made out of something. He inserted the blades into their scabbards and put the belt on over his outfit, testing how they fitted. Cade watched as he made minute adjustments to the belt and scabbards with his magic, until they sat perfectly around his waist, not even bouncing when he jumped or ran. Cade was impressed, to be honest, as well as relieved that his light had calmed down when the swords went into their scabbards. Izuku pulled the swords in and out a few times quickly to test them, and smiled when he was done, taking the belt off and returning it to his study. He then came back out to Cade and smiled savagely. Go get some sleep, Cade, tomorrow will be a very important day. Cade nodded, standing up and leaving Izuku to rest. He knew what was coming. He knew what Izuku had planned. And you know what? He knew that he would be successful. He believed in the kid. You got it, kiddo. You get some sleep as well. After all, you've got a prince to dethrone. The landing zone had been cleared. The Lightborn had a small foothold on the moon, earned through the blood, sweat, and tears of many guardians. The Hive had been pushed back from the entrance to the Hellmouth, for now. That meant that they had to be quick. Hydras. Let's get a move on. Our LZ is a hotspot. Prep your transmats before we get there for a quick drop. F off, I know what to do. Yes, Captain. Izuku looked around the hangar as the Hydras got into their various ships. He followed his counterpart to the last remaining pair, Mikumo and Katsuki. Katsuki was sitting in the front seat of his ship, looking at Izuku. He had chosen to ride in Katsuki's ship to not make both him and Mikumo uncomfortable. Get in, pipsqueak. And don't stab my chair with those toothpicks. Izuku nodded and made sure that his swords didn't stab into the fabric that lined the seats as he sat down. He wiggled his butt on the chair. It was surprisingly comfortable, for a spaceship meant to participate in battles. The cockpit snapped shut, and Izuku could hear the engine spinning up. He tapped on his earpiece a few times and heard the crackling as he connected to the system. Is everyone ready? Hell yeah. Ready when you are, little man. Izuku gave a thumbs up to Katsuki. The man hummed and nodded, then his ship shot out straight forward, slamming Izuku into his seat as he quickly left the Earth's atmosphere, the other 5 ships following him. The moon quickly came into view, and Izuku heard Mikumo's voice. All right, squad. ETA 45 seconds to LZ. Get ready. Mikumo's skill showed, as exactly 44 seconds later, Izuku counted, they arrived over the moon's surface at the right distance to transmat. Katsuki looked back to him and nodded. Get down there, kid, I'm transmitting now. Izuku nodded and watched as the Guardian vanished from thin air, and smiled. He pulled on his power and envisioned the battle below. And like a corpse floating in a river, he relinquished control, and let his energy push him to the end of the flow he had created. Izuku disappeared from the ship in a puff of black and green smoke, a laugh on his lips as he unsheathed his swords. The drop zone was chaos. The Guardians were at least 200 strong, but the Hive were endless. That's the only way that Yura could describe it. She had told Mikumo when she joined his squad that she trusted him completely and that she would follow him to the depths of hell and back. Mikumo had apparently taken her up on that offer. The second she had rematerialized enough to move, she was firing at the hordes of Hive soldiers crashing up against their foothold. Her gear was top of the line, but even she found that some of the knights she fired at took way more shots than they should have. She hadn't been present the day that Crota had decimated the Guardians exploring the moon, but she had lost her best friend, Tsu, to the Hive Prince that day. So when Mikumo had told her that they were going to kill Crota, there was no doubt in her heart that she would fight. And fight she did. A wall of purple fire erupted from the ground at her command, roasting a line of acolytes with the burning cold of void energy. She jumped, and then jumped again in midair, getting a look over the wall to scout out the biggest threats of the next incoming wave. 3 knights and an ogre on her 4 o'clock. The Guardians holding the line had the knights, but she should probably help with the ogre. Pulling out her heaviest weapon, her trusty rocket launcher, and let it lock onto the ogre. Bracing herself, she pulled the trigger and watched the rocket shoot out at high speed, impacting the ogre on the side of the head, staggering it enough for it to stop shooting its I-beam. This let a whole fire team of Guardians charge it, and they quickly made short work of it. Nodding to herself, she landed on the ground and heard a crackle in her ear. Full squad, converge on the Hellmouth's entrance. Izuku's figured it out. She turned and sprinted towards the Hellmouth, doing her best to ignore the sounds behind her. She had a mission to do. Staying and helping the other Guardians who were holding the Hive off would only give them more work. She reached the Hellmouth and gave a nod to Mikumo. She would trust him, and this small, strange boy that was here to guide them. Izuku hummed as he felt around the Hellmouth's enchantments. There was a reason that so many fire teams got lost in it. The Hive had set it up that the pool of energy coating the pit transported people who entered it to different locations, depending on the flow of the energy. That was what Izuku was currently trying to manipulate. He knew that if they just jumped down into the pit, they would be placed somewhere randomly, and have to fight their way to Crota. Izuku knew many places in the Hellmouth that could, and definitely would, kill the Guardians in his party quite easily. He was especially worried about the Abyss, the weight of the darkness slowing the Guardians down, and Iryut, Crota's Deathsinger, and occasional CNCBN. But he had purged the memories of that horrible sight a long time ago. He was attempting to scour the pathways of the pit's energy, to make a gateway straight to Crota. After a few minutes, he hummed to himself, slightly disappointed. He hadn't been able to get directly to Crota's chamber, but he had at least been able to get to the end of the thrallway, as he liked to call it. He looked over to Mikumo, who was guarding him, and nodded. Mikumo, we must begin at once. Mikumo nodded at him. Full squad, converge on the Hellmouth's entrance. Izuku's figured it out. It took a few moments, but the mighty Hydras eventually all reached Izuku and Mikumo. Izuku smiled at them. All right. When I give you the signal, you are going to jump. Mina ped her head to the side. Jump where? Izuku pointed towards the Hellmouth. Jump into the pit. Mina glanced over at Mikumo. The man just nodded to her, and she shrugged. All right then. Just tell us when, little dude. Izuku nodded and hearing no other concerns turned towards the pit. The might Hydras all shivered as they felt darkness coalesce around him. And then his hands ignited in green fire. Gods, Izuku had never felt so powerful. All around him, creatures were in pain. All around him, Creatures on both sides were being injured, screaming into the depths of space, writhing in pain at the dull agony of gunshot wounds and the stinging of a claw's cut. He could feel it all. Every cut, every bullet wound, every burn from solar light, every atom screaming in pain as arc light tore them apart, the painful silence that the cold flames of void light brought. And it made him feel strong. He turned to the pit and raised his arms, a dull hum coming to his throat as he funneled all that agony towards his goals, using himself as its shepherd. He felt flames of energy pool in his palms. And then he spoke. Agony of 1,000 warriors, reveal my path. He felt the energy of the Hellmouth straighten out slightly, bending to his will. But it wasn't enough yet. Agony of 1,000 warriors, breach the barriers. He could almost feel the stares of the mighty Hydras on his back as he allowed the darkness to flow through him, motioning with his hands as he mentally tried to tear a hole in the fabric of reality big enough for the entire squad. Agony of 1,000 warriors, open the gate. There was a soft rumbling as if the Hellmouth was resisting one final time, but Izuku knew he had done it. He felt the portal open, and the power that he had gotten from all the pain around him draining rapidly to keep it open. He turned to the mighty Hydras. Jump! Katsuki had never been scared of anything in his entire time as a guardian. The first thing he had done when he was revived by his ghost was to walk out of the building he had woken up in with a gun strapped to his back and the head of a Vex Minotaur strung over his shoulder. He had fought fallen captains with his bare hands and torn them apart without using his solar light. He had completely vaporized a Cabal tank with his light while Mikumo got a scavenger group to safety. Katsuki didn't do being scared. He was never scared. That wasn't to say he never felt fear. The Vex Minotaur had almost torn him apart before he knew he wouldn't stay dead, and he had been terrified of losing his new chance at living. He had almost lost his ghost while wrestling the fallen captain, and he still had nightmares about what could have happened. And the Cabal tank? It had been one, maybe two shots away from demolishing an entire settlement of lightless in the wilderness. He had never been someone with a bleeding heart, that was Mikumo's thing, but he had feared for the safety of those people. And even after all that, no level of fear had ever come close to the rising tension in his chest as he followed his fire team into the tear in reality before him. He felt the darkness flowing past him as all feelings of gravity left him, leaving him floating down a tube of green and black light that felt wrong to him in every sense of the word. He couldn't even see his teammates anymore, only feel their light, and even that was muffled. He was confident that they could do this. They had every advantage they could get, and they were the god DMN mighty Hydras. If anyone could slay Crota, it was them. That didn't stop the absolute fear he felt towards what he knew would happen if they failed. The thrallway was deathly silent, with not even the sounds of the battle above them reaching this far down. Izuku landed silently on his feet, his hands grabbing at the handles to his blades as he watched the mighty Hydras appear on the ground in front of him. To their credit, they adjusted to their new positions quickly, landing on their feet with grace. Izuku supposed that Transmat was fairly similar in principle, and most likely afforded them some form of practice for the portals of the Hive. He watched as they scanned the room, weapons up. He was glad they were taking this seriously. Welcome to the Thrallway, Guardians. Normally we would be set upon by a legion of thralls, but it seems the majority of the grunts are focused on the Guardians above. He motioned for them to follow him and quickly ducked into a secret alcove before the drop to Iryut's chambers. He pried open the chest from the middle of the alcove, thankful that the doors were still open. It seemed that if you just warped to the end, they didn't start to close. Grabbing a handful of a tough, chitinous cloth from the chest, Izuku stuffed them into his pack and rolled his shoulders, looking down the hole in the floor at the black puddle of liquid underneath it. The Hydras gathered around him, looking at Izuku and waiting for him to give them the signal. He scanned them, seeing if any looked close to losing their nerve now that they were so close to Crota. He was glad to see that none of them had anything but determination on their faces. He nodded to himself. All right everyone, put on your helmets and make sure that no sound is capable of entering at all. You must not hear anything that is sung down there, whether it be from me or Iryut. He watched as all of the Guardians put on their helmets and gave him a thumbs up as their hearing was shut off. But he knew that wasn't going to be enough. He reached up and grabbed onto Mikumo's shoulders, smiling at the man. He knew that blocking out the sound alone wouldn't stop the death song from obliterating people. It would slow it down, allowing someone to get out of range, but in a confined space like Crota's chamber, they wouldn't be able to get far enough away. To fix that, they had to be protected from the telepathic part of the song as well. And he had been working on a spell that would allow him to share his quirk's protections with someone for a limited amount of time. With that in mind, Izuku pulled on Mikumo's shoulders, slamming his forehead into the man's helmet. Before both of them stumbled back, a sharp green V burned onto the front of Mikumo's helmet. Izuku ignored the dull throbbing in his forehead and reached toward Shoto, who bent down a little bit to allow Izuku to reach him. The other Hydras went after Shoto, and Izuku branded each of their helmets with his protective rune. Finishing the final preparations, Izuku bowed to the Guardians, thanking them for coming with him. When the prince was slain, he would be in their debt for a good while. But it was worth it. He turned away from the Hydras and let out a roar, the air around him shaking as he leapt into the air and the hole in front of them. It was time for the Hive Prince to meet his end. The caverns themselves shook around them. Mikumo had been in many odd situations, but he had never done a raid without any noise before. It was weird and meant that he was almost constantly spinning as he walked, not willing to let anything sneak up on them. The room they were in was a circular one with a black pool of liquid at their feet, green torches surrounding them, and one hallway out into an open courtyard, where Mikumo could already see a few Hive Knights crouched on the floor. Almost immediately after they all landed, Mikumo let his hand fall on Yura's shoulder, stopping the small amounts of void light that was flowing from her hands. All of the Hydras knew what Crota had done to Yura's squadmates on the moon, but Tsuyu's final death had been a hard blow to Yura's mental health. He was pulled out of that thought process when the ground underneath them shook a little. He watched as Izuku seemed to yell something, his arms igniting in a bright green fire as the kid ran ahead of the group, motioning for them to follow. The kid was kind of insane, but he knew what he was doing. Probably. Mikumo had faith in him. In himself. Izuku's arms burned with energy as he shot forward. The death song was already flowing through the air around him, encouraging him to go faster, push harder. While the opening verse of the death song wasn't lethal, it was still unpleasant to unprotected minds. Luckily, the charms he had placed on the mighty Hydra's helmet seemed to be working for now, but he couldn't risk them being exposed to the death song's chorus, the most deadly part of the song. An acolyte who dared get in his way was ripped apart by Izuku's fire, leaving nothing but charred remains behind as Izuku barely slowed down. He heard the mighty Hydras firing at the various hive in front of him as he moved, and nodded to himself. Being back in the Hellmouth was stressful for him, but this time he wasn't alone. And he was stronger than he had ever been. He was on the lower level of Crota's throne room at the moment, and he knew that it was likely Iryut was hiding inside the crystal room that was above him now. She hid behind her song and her prince, preying on those unprepared to face her. Izuku despised her. His hand cannon roared in his ears as he put a knight down, watching as it dissolved in front of his eyes, the magical rounds in the cannon's chamber doing their job. He slammed his foot into another knight's shield, rocketing himself upwards to the upper platforms. Thralls were crushed under his feet as he landed on them, and used as launching pads to push him forward. Now that he was on the upper level, all he had to do was fight his way through one of the corridors and take the witch down. He heard the different forms of light going off behind him, and saw that Mina had copied his move and was right behind him, a shotgun in her hands. The other Hydras were making their way towards the staircase to his right. She nodded at him, and there was a moment of silence. Izuku almost flinched as the woman exploded with power, blue arc light flowing over her body as dual daggers of pure light appeared in her hands. It was almost appealing how she danced forward, Hive falling at her feet as the blades of arc light cut through them without resistance. She quite literally blinked out of existence a few times as well, appearing in surprise positions around her enemies. Izuku made sure to study how she moved with her blades, as it could be a very helpful thing to learn for his own swords. But even then, she wasn't his focus. Now that they had reached the hallway with the other Hydras behind them, Izuku could see her. Iryut. And she was staring right back at him, ready to continue into the chorus. Shoto dodged one of the acolyte's fireballs, returning the favor with one of his own. After Mikumo, he was the most experienced guardian here, but even he had never seen anything like this. The hive that were protecting their prince's throne room were rabid, wild. Not even the vault of glass had been this hectic or as big of a pressure on his light. The vault of glass had almost been like a game. There was a steady pressure on his light, just enough to make reviving difficult, and each room had rules that even the Vex had seemed to follow. But this? This was chaotic and confusing, and the pressure on his light was both stronger and less stable, fluctuating, making it hard to gauge his available strength at any moment. His pulse rifle vibrated in his hands as he fired it over and over, making sure to keep track of the number at the top of the gun to keep track of his ammo now that he was unable to hear the click it made when the clip was empty. He watched as Midoriya cut the head off the final knight in the hallway and nodded to himself as the green shield between them and the hive which that Midoriya called Iryut dissipated. Almost immediately, they were attacked by another swarm of hive, this time accompanied by powerful blasts from Iryut. Shoto made sure to focus on the smaller hive, as his job for this raid was to keep the little guys off of their heavy hitters. Solar light flowed through him as he used his radiance, and he could feel himself improve in almost every way. The darkness weighed on him less, and his vision was filled with fire as he swept his left arm out in front of him, a barrage of solar grenades hitting the group of smaller Hive in front of him. It might have been because he was so focused on the smaller Hive, and the fire coursing through his veins, that he never saw the knight's sword coming. Yura turned to the knight that was now standing over Shoto's ghost, Fuyumi. Shoto's body was laid out on the floor, unmoving, the solar light fading quickly. A scream of anger ripped out of her as void light pulsed in her hands, a bow and arrow appearing in her grasp. She refused to allow another one of her friends to fall to the Hive. The purple arrow shot directly through the knight's chest, blowing a hole open in it, before collapsing in on itself into a purple orb, tethers flowing out and grabbing the various Hive around them. She could sense her light pressing down on the tethered Hive and was glad to see that her shot was close enough to include Iryut. The Deathsinger looked a bit stressed now that both Izuku and Mikumo had engaged her in combat, with Katsuki keeping an ogre off of them. She was about to head forward and try to assist in Shoto's revival when a green blur shot past her, landing in front of the ghost. She was about to fire when she saw that it was Izuku, a small green sphere coating his hand as he touched Fuyumi, who instantly revived Shoto. She could almost sense how the green orb was absorbing the ambient darkness in the room, redirecting it from Fuyumi and allowing for a faster revive. Izuku nodded to her before his head whipped back to Iryut, and he shot towards her again. Yura was left watching him for a moment before she pushed herself back into action, using her light to vaporize an acolyte as Shoto got his bearings again. The kid was a solid fighter, and his powers were intriguing and incredibly unsettling. Izuku hadn't fought this hard in a while. The tower had been a place where he wasn't constantly on edge, or listening for the next ambush, or source of food, or avoiding the detection spells the Hive used at random times. The tower had been a refuge, a safe place. He was glad that he could call it home and glad that he could help the people who lived there as well. But something about this, about diving back into the Hellmouth, with true power behind him, was intoxicating. The thrum of adrenaline through his body let him push himself further, faster. If he didn't have his quirk up as much as it could be, he might have thought something was messing with his head. But he able to beat her without Mikumo's help. It was humbling to know how much more he had to grow before he could be formidable enough on his own, and it also meant that even the 45% of her strength he had drained was a significant boost. He looked over and saw Mikumo and the Hydras standing up, looking ready to go. Izuku nodded to them and turned to the summoning crystal. It was time to begin. He reached out and put his palms on the crystal, pushing his magic forwards to touch the magic of the crystal. He felt heat on his arms and could sense the crystal accepting his commands. His eyes were closed, so he couldn't truly see it, but he could feel Crota's gate forming on the platform underneath his oversoul. With a final push, Izuku felt the gate click into place, and almost instantly he pulled his arms out of the crystal as a wave of darkness washed over him, one of the strongest sources of darkness he had ever felt manifesting nearby. At that moment he knew it had worked. Crota had arrived. Impure wretch! Scum of the tunnels! You dare summon me? Izuku winced as Crota's voice boomed through the cavern. A quick glance made it clear that even the Guardians had felt it. The vibrations Crota released when he talked were powerful enough to shake the air around them. Adrenaline pumping through his veins, Izuku let his magic back into the crystal in front of him, allowing the green fields to dissipate. The screeches of approaching thralls and acolytes echoed through the chamber. As the field dropped, the Guardians immediately started to push forward, and Izuku pulled his swords back out and moved ahead of them. Moments after the barrier fell, the first group of thralls came into view, their heads glowing with green energy. Izuku scowled and sheathed one of his swords, pulled out his hand cannon, and shot one of them in the head, watching as it exploded. The force of its ignition pushed the others back, making them suffer the same fate as the first, with the entire group detonating, leaving behind green sludge on the floor. He hopped over the sludge and turned the corner, decapitating an acolyte as he did, and blinked as he felt another surge of power run through him. That acolyte had been more powerful than the others so far. Why? Letting the Guardians cover him, he turned back and discovered why. The yellow stripe across the acolyte's chest marked it as one of Crota's spawn. Izuku had only seen a few yellow bars, as he called them, but they were usually stronger than their peers. Arise, bearer of blades. Smite the Lightborn. Bring me the corpse of the unthinking one. Izuku growled in response to that, watching as doors on either side of the arena opened up. Hive knights with black exoskeletons exited the doorways, red fire showing underneath the cracks in their armor. Planted into the ground were swords almost as tall as Izuku, made of the same black and red that the knights were. Sword bearers. Some of the toughest knights in Crota's brood. Izuku would never have been able to take one, let alone two of them by himself. But he wasn't by himself anymore. Rockets fired from behind Izuku, 6 of them all slamming into one of the sword bearers, almost vaporizing it and leaving only its blade behind, stabbed into the ground. Izuku rushed over to the sword and pulled Mikumo alongside him, pointing to the blade, miming a swinging motion, before pointing at the Guardian. Mikumo nodded, and there was a flash of arc light as he pulled the cleaver out of the floor. It glowed in response to Mikumo's light, as if angry at the being who was wielding it but unable to do anything about it. Mikumo darted off to the other sword bearer, the cleavers slamming together as it brought up its own sword to block Mikumo's slash. Mikumo pushed off its chest, landing on the ground as more rockets slammed into the second sword bearer, which suffered the same fate as its partner. This time, Izuku pointed at Katsuki, who nodded back at him, putting his rifle away as he ripped the sword from the ground. Izuku didn't watch him, though, as he was too busy dodging the slashes of a new swarm of thralls that had been released. As the last thrall died, he looked up at Crota, who was just pacing around on his platform, watching as Izuku and the Hydras fought. Why wasn't he fighting? Arrogance? Confidence? Whatever the reason, Izuku was glad for it. Crota was underestimating them, underestimating him. Izuku would make sure he regretted that. Izuku dodged out of the way of a regular knight's sword, planting his feet and diving between the knight's legs, slashing both of the knight's legs. The knight tumbled down to the ground, and Izuku leapt onto its back, plunging both of his blades into the gaps of its armor. He was about to continue when he found himself getting tackled by one of the guardians, Mina, right as the purple beam of an ogre's eye blast shot through where he had been standing. He nodded to her as she readied her rocket launcher, firing off a shot at the ogre as soon as she was able to. Letting the guardians focus on the ogres that had appeared at the swordbearer's death, Izuku gritted his teeth and jumped. Pain shot down his legs as he rocketed upwards until he landed on the platform that Crota was on. He watched as both Mikumo and Katsuki followed him right after, the Hive sword still in their grasps. Izuku nodded to himself, snarling at Crota. Crota roared in response, slamming the floor with the tip of his sword. You dare? You dare stand before the Hive Prince, in defiance of him. Izuku roared as best he could in response, sheathing his swords as he beat his own chest. I dare. You will die this day, Crota. The growl that came from Crota at that made the floor beneath them rumble, but Izuku and the other 2 guardians stood their ground. You are as much of a fool as you are a thief. Izuku immediately opened a small portal to his right and dove into it, narrowly avoiding Crota's sword as it slammed into the ground where he had been standing. He appeared out of the exit to his portal on top of the sword and started to run up it as Mikumo and Katsuki flanked the prince. Izuku felt the sword shift beneath his feet and he jumped straight up, opening another small portal and dropping down onto Crota's head, slamming both of his swords into the crown of his skull. Crota roared and swatted at Izuku with his free hand, but Izuku dropped down to the small of the prince's back, holding onto one of the ridges of his exoskeleton. But while he hadn't done much damage, he had been a fine distraction. Bam. Izuku watched as both of the Hive swords impacted Crota's chest, the green shield around his body blinking for a moment before stabilizing, albeit with a weaker glow. Izuku immediately dropped off of Crota's back and into another portal, appearing back near where he had started, and dragged the 2 guardians back towards him, swords and all, with his magic. He gave them a thumbs up before creating a ball of fire in his hands and throwing it up to Crota's eyes, forcing it to latch onto his face. He knew he wasn't powerful enough to actually damage Crota with his spells, but the fire over his eyes should make it harder to see. Weakling! You are weak, unthinking one. Can you not defeat me with your own strength? Izuku roared back. I don't need to. My ally's strength is my own, and my strength is my ally's. Blasphemy! Izuku ignored him as Crota seemed to start swinging his swords around with little care for who got hit. Izuku, while dodging the attacks, even saw a few unfortunate knights and a wizard get struck by one of their prince's swings. All of you will die. Izuku was about to continue fighting when he saw Crota stop moving, falling to a knee as a green light shot into the sky and into the orb above them. The green crystal above Crota, the Hive Prince's oversoul, started to pulse. Immediately, Izuku used his portals on all of the guardians he could see and sent them to one of the platforms further back before waving at them and shooting the oversoul. They seemed to understand and immediately started firing at the oversoul, and Izuku could see it was working. He could feel the darkness that was trying to build up around it failing to reach it as the pressure of gunfire and light was put on it. Eventually, the glowing stopped, and the line of green light shot back down to Crota, who roared, but was still on one knee. Izuku rushed forward, motioning for Mikumo and Katsuki to follow him because he had noticed something. Crota's shield was gone. Whatever he had done to his oversoul, having it fail had cost him the shield that made him seem invincible. Izuku yelled in triumph as both Mikumo's and Katsuki's swords slammed into Crota's chest, doing visible damage and making the Hive Prince roar in pain. Izuku grabbed onto that pain and relished the amount of it he was getting from Crota, and how good it felt to have helped make the damnable prince bleed. He must have relished it a bit too much though, because soon enough he found himself coming into contact with Crota's fist. Pain spiked all over his body as Crota punched him, sending him flying backwards. He roared in pain as he landed near the back of the giant platform, willing his broken body to regenerate, using his new stores of power and the pain of Crota himself to fuel his magic. His flesh stitched itself back together, his bones snapped into place, and after mere seconds, Izuku was back and ready to keep fighting, albeit without a good chunk of his energy now. Crota had no such luck. The damage that the Guardians had done with the swords, infused with light, seemed to have struck the exposed Crota badly, as the prince wasn't regenerating. Or maybe that was the trade-off for such a powerful shield? Izuku didn't know, but it didn't matter. If the prince couldn't heal, then they were going to win this. Izuku could feel it in his bones. Damnable whelps. Die already. A wave of Crota's hand had doors opening all over the arena, Hive spilling out of them like a flood. Luckily, most of them were thralls, but there were a lot more knights than Izuku had ever seen in one place before. Izuku looked over to check on Mikumo and Katsuki and froze. Katsuki had somehow been killed while Izuku was regenerating, probably from one of Crota's wild slashes after he recovered enough to attack again, and his ghost was too far out of the way for any of the Guardians to go after at the moment. Mikumo's Hive sword had been snapped in half, leaving the Guardian with just the handle and a jagged edge around half a meter out from the hilt. But that wasn't what Izuku was worried about. Mikumo gave him a pained smile, his helmet dropping off of his head, damaged beyond repair. Mikumo's mind was now unprotected. If Crota succeeded with his next Oversoul attack, there was a good chance that Mikumo would die. Quite possibly his final death. Izuku turned back to Crota and snarled. He wasn't going to let that happen. Sound rushed back into Mikumo's ears very suddenly. He had been struck by one of Crota's attacks, but it was only a glancing blow. He had been much luckier than Katsuki, who had been killed by the attack, and his ghost Mitsuki was currently doing her best to hide behind the rest of the Hydras, unable to revive him at the moment due to the overwhelming pressure of the ambient darkness around them. He looked down at the sword in his grasp and saw that the sword had been snapped in half. He let it fall to the ground, a scowl on his face. He felt the air around him gaining a static charge as the familiar sound of arc light crackled around him. Izuku! How much more do we need to do to take this guy down? Izuku glanced over in his direction, his face twisted in a snarl. Not much. A few more hits comparable to that last one should be enough for me to finish the job. Mikumo nodded, doing a quick scan of his surroundings. His sword was gone and wouldn't be much help, but Katsuki had apparently been able to throw his sword to the side before dying. In a flash of arc light, Mikumo darted over and grabbed the sword, letting his arc light flow through the blade. He turned back to Izuku and smiled. All right then. Let's do this. As Izuku darted forward, both of his swords unsheathed and covered in raging green fire, Mikumo followed him, the Hive sword at his hip leaving a trail of blue lightning in his wake. Both of them dove to either side of another slam from Crota's sword, and Mikumo ignored the ground-shakingly loud roar that Crota released. He saw Izuku disappear in a puff of green and black smoke, appearing behind Crota and jabbing his swords into the newly regenerated shield Crota had up. Izuku yelled out in the Hive tongue, and his swords gained an ethereal glow as Crota's shield dropped a bit. It seemed that when Izuku had called his swords leeches, he was being literal. Mikumo used the distraction to place an orb of arc light right on Crota's chest, dodging the swipe that came his way as arc energy pulsed over Crota's shield. He was about to cheer when he heard Crota yell something else. Izuku yelled something in response, and suddenly Mikumo found himself getting flung backwards. He landed with a thud, rolling to a stop, his head pulsing with a headache like none he had felt before. Izuku landed next to him on his feet and dragged him upright. Mikumo nodded to him and was about to thank him when his throat dried up. Izuku was standing in front of him, but this time with only one sword in his hand. Hand, single. Izuku's left arm was gone. Evisceration. Izuku watched as arc energy pulsed over Crota's shield, and Crota roared out that one word. Izuku immediately grabbed himself with a portal and placed the exit in front of Mikumo. Bulwark. He moved his left arm forward, a spike of pain rushing through it as a shield formed in front of Mikumo, protecting him from the pulse of energy that came from Crota's shield. The shield seemed to hold for a moment, before a cold chill hit his shoulder, the pain in his arm disappearing as the shield collapsed, sending Mikumo flying backwards, but unharmed. He rushed over to Mikumo and pulled him up, finding it weird that his left arm seemed to not respond to that order, only his right arm reaching down to help the man up. Are you all right? My shield should have been enough to stop most of that attack from getting to your head. He noticed that Mikumo was staring at his left arm, a shocked look on his face. What? Is something wrong? Oh. Izuku looked down at the stump of his arm, which had been cut off right in the middle of his bicep. It was leaking a little bit of blood, but his supernatural regeneration seemed to have stopped most of the bleeding. It didn't seem to be regrowing his arm though. Are you all right, kid? Izuku heard Mikumo's question, but it sounded like it was in the background of a loud room. Izuku turned slowly, facing Crota, who had apparently sacrificed a bit of his health to perform that move. A cold look slipped onto Izuku's face as he willed his arm to close up, the small jab of pain in his shoulder as it did so nothing. Compared to the rage he felt boiling within him. Mikumo. I'm going to try and bait him into dropping his shield for another attack. Be ready to end this. He glanced backwards and saw Mikumo give him a little nod before moving over and picking the Hive sword back up. Izuku took a deep breath and dug down into his supply of energy, wrangling all of what he had left. Crota. You coward. You speak of fighting with your own strength but hide behind your shield. Fight me head on, if you dare. Izuku didn't even really get a chance to realize how much of a bad idea calling the Crown Prince of the Hive a coward was before he was using a portal to dodge another swing of Crota's sword. He gave Mikumo a small glance back to check if he was all right and was glad to see that he had dodged as well. Coward. Coward. You dare speak to me in such a manner, filth? I will smite you and claim back all of the power you stole. Izuku watched as Crota's shield fell before realizing that it hadn't fallen, exactly. Crota's sword had become a pillar of pure darkness, glowing with fire of such potency that Izuku felt like his own was a drop in an ocean in comparison. Die, human thief. As Crota reared his sword up, ready to swing his blade horizontally, Izuku, for a moment, felt the cold dread of his incoming death. Was this how it was going to end? At the hands of the Hive Prince? Izuku couldn't think of a worse, or more fitting, end to his time in this reality. SCHEVOOMP. That noise? Izuku opened his eyes and saw a small orb of void light at Crota's feet. Where had he seen that before? Mikumo! Izuku! Get him! As Yura's voice washed over him, the ball of void light activated, latching onto Crota's body with a purple tendril. Immediately, the glow of Crota's sword faded as the Hive Prince let out a roar that shook the very air around them. Izuku could feel it. The Night Stalker's tether, suppressing Crota's attack, free to latch on with his shield down, relinquishing Crota of his indomitable defense and his unstoppable attack. Mikumo appeared at Izuku's side, sparkling with arc energy. Izuku, with me. We're finishing this. Before Izuku even registered the words, he and Mikumo were sprinting forward towards the weakened prince. Crota's armor was cracked, his glow was gone, and his flesh was twitching with exertion. Izuku knew they could do this. A wave of thralls appeared in front of Crota as a wizard that the other guardians were fighting noticed what was happening with their prince. Izuku ignored them, jumping up and using the closest one as a springboard into the air, aiming directly for Crota's face. Pain shot down his arm. Mikumo appeared in the air to his right. Pure darkness, everything Izuku had left, pooled into his fist, his entire body giving off ethereal green fire. Mikumo's body sparked with more arc energy than Izuku had ever seen a single guardian use. Both of them reared their fists back as they neared Crota's face, the Hive Prince staring up at them. Izuku could smell the smallest seed of fear from the prince, and it was heavenly. As the air in between Izuku and Mikumo's fist seemed to chill, the temperature between them dropping rapidly as the air seemed to crystallize as Izuku and Mikumo's powers intertwined, they finally reached Crota. Emboldened by Crota's fear, Izuku let out a battle cry that was one of the things he could remember most of his old world. Smayawayawash. Here's a commission I got done for the end of the scene. Thank you to Celerier on Twitter for drawing this for me. Izuku shivered. Was it over? He landed on the hard floor of Crota's platform, his body screaming out in pain that he was too shocked to experience. His vision was blurry and he felt cold. He could hear voices, panicked voices screaming, muffled and reverberating in his head like he was underwater. Who was talking again? He rolled over and stared up at the sky, a bright green orb cracking and falling towards the void behind the platforms. Wasn't there something he needed to? He jumped to his feet as the sounds of the world rushed back into his ears, and everything was clear again. His arm, Crota, Mikumo. Mikumo! Spinning, he saw Yura with an unconscious Mikumo in her arms, and he saw Katsuki's head snap towards Izuku. Izuku was about to say something when Katsuki jumped over to him. Izuku felt his knees buckle and Katsuki grabbed him, holding him up on his feet. Kid, hey kid. Stay with me now. Eyes on me. What's your name? Izuku didn't know why Katsuki was asking that. He knew that already. I'm Izuku Midoriya. Izuku felt his eyes starting to close a little bit, but was shocked open when Katsuki slapped his cheek softly. Nope, none of that shit. What's your name, and how old are you? Izuku opened his mouth to answer but was interrupted when pain shot through his back muscles and abdomen, and he threw up. Katsuki swiftly stepped out of the way but grimaced. Kid, what's your name, and how old are you? Izuku coughed and was slapped softly again as his eyes started to droop. Answer me, kid. You gotta stay awake, so keep talking. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I think I'm 14 years old. It's hard to tell time down here. Katsuki nodded and glanced over Izuku's shoulder as Mina helped Katsuki hold Izuku up. Good work, kid. Now, I know you wanted to do something to Crota after we won. What was that again? Izuku let the words register in his head. He shook his head to clear some of the fuzziness in his thoughts. There was something he wanted to do. His eyes landed on his sword, laying on the ground a few meters away. His sword, he made that too. He pulled out of Katsuki and Mina's grasp as his brain finally caught up and he remembered what he wanted to do. Sheet. I'm wasting it. He dove down and grabbed his sword with his good arm, walking over to Crota's corpse, the torso of which was caved in and weirdly covered in a thin layer of ice. He only got a few steps away when Katsuki grabbed his shoulder. Kid, hold up. What the F do you mean? Izuku pulled away and stabbed his sword forward, sinking it in the exposed muscle of Crota's leg. Crota's strength. I can't let it, I can't waste it, I need it. He activated the sword's ability and felt his head clearing up slightly as power flowed into him. He could feel the pool he drew his power from not only filling but growing in size to accommodate the new energy. Izuku had never felt anything like it. He felt warm, his body filling with this power so far above his own. Hotter. He was heating up. So much power. Not as much as he had hoped for, but still so much power. Even hotter. Izuku breathed as sweat dripped down his body, the heat from inside him growing and growing with every second. Too hot. Too. Aerg. Katsuki didn't know what to think. Logically, he knew how the Hive became stronger, by absorbing the power of those they killed. But he had never seen it in action. Was this really what it was supposed to look like? Then the kid screamed. His hand clutched around the hilt of his sword. Katsuki watched as dark green fire ignited over the kid's entire body. It took Katsuki a moment to realize this wasn't the same fire that the kid had used to fight with. The smell of burning skin filled the air and before he really knew what he was doing, Katsuki's own hands filled with solar energy, his hammer appearing in them. With a swing, it hit the body of the fallen Hive Prince, and the fire around Izuku stopped as the corpse disintegrated from the solar light. Sheet. Kid. The kid was kneeling on the ground, sobbing as he held his hands in front of himself. Kid, are you good enough to walk? We need to get out of here so we can get you a doctor. Katsuki's sentence tapered off as he saw the kid's skin regrowing before his eyes. But even healed, the kid still sobbed. He was about to kneel down and ask the kid if he was all right when Mina did it for him. She wrapped her arms around the boy and pulled his head onto her shoulder, obviously not caring about the tears staining her shoulder pads. It's okay now, you're fine. Crota's dead. You got him. The kid's sobbing stopped for a moment as he mumbled something, but Katsuki couldn't hear what it was. Mina didn't seem to catch it either, sending a confused glance over to Katsuki. What was that, sweetie? Tiitsin Anoheg. Katsuki would call you a liar if you said. He flinched at the noise that escaped the kid's mouth, but he did take a step back as his one hand started to glow. The kid looked at the slowly disintegrating body of Crota and dove towards one of the arms. Katsuki wasn't able to stop him before the sword swung down and severed one of Crota's fingers clean off. The Hive Prince had been so big that even one of the fingers was almost as long as Izuku's torso. Oh shit. Katsuki took a step forward, reaching out for the kid, and he could hear his fire team yell out behind him as Izuku dropped his sword and grabbed the finger, bringing it up to the stump of his left arm. Medn. Enrattemar uio kodo ofrm me. Izuku's stump burned. The bright green blood on the end of Crota's finger was like lava against his skin, but Izuku didn't care. It wasn't enough. The power he had gotten from Crota was intoxicating, but Izuku could tell that it still wasn't enough to push through to his old world. Tears ran down his face as he grabbed onto the pain that the skin contact with Crota's finger created, as well as all of the pain in the chamber. He tried to ignore how much of it was coming from Mikumo. Mend. Return the arm you took from me. Izuku yelled as human flesh and Hive latched onto each other. Fire filled his veins as Crota's finger merged with the stump of his arm, shifting slightly as Izuku's magic forced it into a replacement arm. He cried out as his senses suddenly spread through the arm as well, letting him feel the bones shifting, the skin shrinking and growing. His throat was too hoarse to do much more than croak in pain by the time the very tip of the finger split into 4 sections, clawed fingers of its own sprouting from the end. Izuku looked down at the arm and released his magic once he felt it settle. His body was in agony, lava ran through his veins, and he felt like throwing up. But he had done it. So while his body was ready to drop from sheer exhaustion and overuse, Izuku did one last thing. Moving to the head, he reached down with his new arm and grabbed the middle of Crota's 3 eyes. He ripped it out of the Hive Prince's head and summoned a portal with the other hand back to the inside of a protective container in his study. And then he collapsed, utterly spent. Crota was dead, and Izuku had regained the arm the BSTRD had taken from him. And even still, Izuku cried, denied the power necessary to return home just yet. Much like the heart of the Black Garden, Crota's death was felt much further than just the moon. Deep in the vast reaches of space, on board the mighty dreadnought, thralls, acolytes, and even knights ran from their king's chambers as Oryx roared, reality itself shaking as his anger became known. Black and white portals opened up around the chamber, and through them stepped a multitude of creatures, monochromatic themselves, jittery and wrong. With a swing of his blade, Oryx slew them all, venting his anger and hatred to them, as the walls of the dreadnought shook from the force of his fury. When it was over, the portals closed, and Oryx once again was alone in his chamber, his blade stabbed into the ground as he stared out into space, towards the pathetic ball of stone that Crota had been murdered on, the ripples of his power being diminished as something defiled his son. Something dared to try and take his son's power for their own. It brought Oryx nothing more than pure, unending hate for whoever this betrayer was. But if they thought it was over, if they thought they were safe, with Crota slain, Oryx would take the opportunity to show them how pitiful they really were. While the father raged, Xivu Arath pondered. She pulled her blade from the chest of the creature she had slain. She didn't even know what it was called, but now that it was dead, she supposed it didn't matter. She could barely feel the power drain into her, the majority of the kill siphoned off to her worm. But it wasn't just that one kill that flowed through her. All over the valley that she fought in, her brood slew the creatures as well. These creatures were brilliant. Just strong enough to provide a meaningful battle, but far enough beneath them that their victory was certain. Acolyte, bring me the name of these creatures. I shall have their epitaph written in my Hall of Conquests. She watched a nearby acolyte heed her command, and frowned, staring up at the sky as something reached her. The vibration that tore her as she overlooked the fight was a morbid one, more than usual. She could feel the death of her nephew, the energy that Crota had built up throughout his years of conquest rippling through the ascendant plane. While she herself had refused to create a proper throne world for herself, she was still sensitive to the energies of the world. Something had killed Crota and stolen part of his power. Inhaling, she could quite literally smell the sweet energy that came from the battle. It must have been glorious, to create such a pleasant scent. Perhaps another one of the Lightborn had fallen to temptation as Dredgenya did so long ago? It was in the right solar system for the Lightborn, and they made such wonderful combatants. No, it couldn't be a Lightborn. They were distinct, the power that she got from their fights always had the scent of the Traveler on it. This was something else, but she couldn't tell what. It was like a void in space where a creature's soul should be bare to her. What an interesting thing. Savathùn must be having a ball figuring it out. She was. It was an odd feeling for her, knowing that someone had understood what she was thinking. It lacked the growth in power that her Mbaru usually gave her when people tried. Such a delightful thing a proper mystery was. The way that information hinted at things, the way the pieces slowly came into place to reveal the entire, satisfying whole. Oh, how she loved a mystery. Savathùn floated through her realm, listening to Curia work, its simulations and hypothesis informative and entertaining. She brushed her hand over the pools of pure black water, before lowering herself down and standing atop it. Crota was dead. It was a shame, in her eyes. She had manipulated the knight many times, more than anyone else actually knew, and found him to be quite interesting. His strength was far above what she or her siblings had been at his age. Oryx had once bragged to her that Crota's power was proof that the system they had set up was the correct path, that the sword logic was truly the way they were meant to go. She still wasn't truly convinced, especially not after Oryx had revealed the trap their worms had set for them. Humming to herself, she ignored Curia for a moment, focusing on the ripples Crota's death had created. She almost laughed as she realized that something had absorbed a chunk of the prince's power for themselves. And better yet, she wasn't able to sense the mind of whoever had done so. The drain was sloppy, inefficient, but Savathùn was delighted either way. Something devious was on the Earth's moon, something that didn't follow the rules. She loved scheming, and she loved her plans, but truly, there was nothing more interesting than a rogue element. So, you have succeeded, oh, friend mine. Even from inside the dreaming city, with its padding from the rest of the universe, Riven could feel it. Her gilded cage resonated with the death of the Hive Prince, and Riven could do nothing but laugh. Her little distraction had proven more capable than she had expected. To slay Crota was a stunning feat. He might have had assistance, but still, Riven was impressed. She chuckled as she felt footsteps running towards her, and created an eye on the side of her head to look at the wall. Gunshots rang out, echoing through the gaps in the walls, and symbols showed up on the screen as the Queen's Tekunes made a wish. 3 symbols flashed one after the other. A wish to grant knowledge. Riven's form rippled with her amusement. Such waves her little human was making, that even the awoken queen was intrigued. Mara Sov thought herself so clever, but if she was making a wish to her, then even she couldn't figure it out. How wonderful it was. Riven spoke, and the fabric of reality rippled around her as she fulfilled the Teshun's wish. She left out her little human's name, of course, but Mara Sov knew better than to press her for the information Riven didn't want to give her. As she floated around her chamber, finishing the wish, she allowed some of her focus to fall on her little human. The poor, lucky, determined child. He lay on his bed in the so-called last city, as he had since the Lightbearers had returned home. The wish was completed, and it let her devote her full attention to her little human, and the new arm he sported. She had not been able to witness the fight, but it seemed that he had lost his original. Such an unfortunate thing it was, to be dependent on the shape one was born with. Had she lost an arm, it would have been a little worry to create herself a new one. Mayhaps he would ask for it back with a wish? That would be interesting. She had warned him off making a wish before he had gone to fight the Hive Prince, as her little human hadn't been strong enough to bear the brunt of the consequence of making a wish to an Ahamkara. It would have been a shame to lose her new favorite creature so soon. But now, he might be strong enough for a small wish. Minor things. It would be a long time until she could do his original wish for him without the backlash killing him, but a small boon might be possible here and there. Chuckling to herself, she spoke, fulfilling a wish, one not technically for her own sake, and therefore within the rules of her powers to fulfill. Awake and arise, relaxed and refreshed, oh, entertainer mine. Izuku's eyes flew open. Riven. His eyes adjusted to the dark of the room almost immediately, showing him that Riven was in fact not in his bedroom. Which was weird, seeing as he had heard her voice just then. Actually no, her actually being in his room was definitely weirder. He leaned over and tapped the base of his lamp, blinking as it turned on. He pulled the cover off of himself, revealing that he was still wearing his combat gear, with most of his weapons sitting on his desk to the right, his pack and boots next to them. Throwing his legs over the side of the bed, he moved to stand up, pushing on his knees with his hands, before yelling out in shock as something reminiscent of an acolyte's claw touched his knee. He moved to grab it, only to see the claw reach out and snap closed around the air in front of him. He stared at it in shock for a moment, before memories started flooding back to him. He barely felt himself rise to his feet as he stared at the hand, no at the whole arm, from the middle of his bicep down. Oh God, what had he done? What would this mean for him? What about his quirk? Would integrating hive biology into his body destroy the barrier his quirk gave him? Why? He was pulled from his stupor by a knock echoing through his house from the front door. Kid? Kid? I thought I heard you say something. You awake in there? I got a cookie for you if you are. Izuku got the door to his bedroom open before his shaking knees forced him to the ground with a thud. Almost a second later, his door was kicked in as Cade busted it down, eyes darting around to find him, zeroing in on him almost instantly. Kid! Izuku barely had time to look up at him before he felt metal arms wrap around his body. Hey kid, you alright? Izuku opened his mouth, trying to say something, only to choke on his breath. He shook his head as his mind kept shouting worst-case scenarios at him, and Cade patted his back. It's okay Izuku, you're safe now. You're here, in the tower. Nothing can hurt you right now, Izuku. Izuku nodded, his arms squeezing Cade slightly. Cade ruffled his hair a little, chuckling as he pulled back, tapping Izuku's forehead with his horn. Mikumo and the gang told me what happened. Nodding his head, Izuku spoke involuntarily, his voice shaky. You lied about the cookie. Cade laughed, letting Izuku go and plop down next to him. That I did. Sorry about that. He smiled, patting Izuku on the shoulder. It's okay to not be okay right now. That was a hell of a thing you did, Ace. Guardians moved quickly out of Zavala's way as he strode towards the Vanguard's meeting chamber of the tower. He got waves and salutes from many of the Titans, nods of acknowledgement from the Hunters and Warlocks. Many of them had been present on the moon, defending the Hydra's landing zone from the seemingly endless Hive, so while he didn't stop like usual, he made sure to return the salutes and nods of every Guardian he could. He pushed the door to the meeting room open, and instantly, his eye twitched, drawn to the corner of the room to his right, where Izuku was sitting, watching as Cade, Ikora, Aerys, and the mighty Hydras settled into their seats. Even without him actively showing it, Zavala could tell that the boy had grown significantly in power because of Crota's death. He wasn't exactly sure how the sword logic worked as a whole, but he understood enough to know that this was a concerning pattern that was starting to form. Pulling his eyes away from Izuku and to the rest of the group, he spoke. Greetings, all. Thank you for coming. I know most of you wanted to rest for a few days, but there is a party being hosted on the tower tonight, so I want to get this debriefing done swiftly. The Hydras seemed to be at differing levels of exhausted, nervous, and a few other emotions. Zavala didn't know them well enough to understand. He only really knew Mikumo on a personal level. It was Katsuki who spoke up first. I don't plan on going to the party, but still I'd rather get this over and done with so I can go back to my patrols. Nodding, Zavala glanced over at Cade and Ikora before sitting down between them. Katsuki sniffed, speaking. All right. So we know that the entry plan was successful, you dropped onto Luna and got into the Hellmouth. But after that, all comms went dark. Pulling out the keyboard from the table in front of him, Zavala got ready to write down the report. What happened next? Izuku sat in his study a few hours after the meeting was over, frowning as he sat and thought. Now that he had gotten time to rest and decompress from Crota, his mind was full, buzzing with ideas. His human hand ran over the palm of the claw he had created from Crota's finger, feeling the rough, almost stone-like exoskeleton. Now that he was calmer, he was able to examine it with a clearer mind. He had created it out of pure desperation at the time, but after giving it a proper look, Izuku couldn't find anything about it that was really worth worrying about. At least, not yet. Lift your head, oh, chaperone mine. We have a party to attend, one that is partially in your honor. Izuku was shaken out of his worry as a regular-looking human girl stepped out through the active portal. Or at least, to anyone lacking his mental shielding, she looked completely normal. She was taller than he was, by about half a head, and her blonde hair hung down to her waist. Izuku was sure there was probably an illusion over her eyes as well, but to him, he could see the black scara with the white dots plain as day. An amused smile formed on his face. He was able to see the subtle stiffness in the girl's joints, as if she wasn't used to moving as she was. Izuku stood, grabbing a necklace he had prepared earlier in the day off his table, and bowed to her slightly. Riven. The girl smirked, shaking out her shoulders, making the formal-looking but practical robes she was wearing flutter about. She waggled a finger at him, the motion janky. That is not my name for tonight. Please refer to me as Evelyn. Izuku raised his eyebrow. Okay, Evelyn. Any particular reason for that name? Riven laughed, trying to cover her mouth with her hand, but instead hitting her eyes. Izuku struggled to hold back a snort as Evelyn looked at the offending hand with frustration. My first proper visit to the last city of humanity has me feeling a bit nostalgic to the days before the Great Hunt. There was a lightless human woman of all things, who once came to me with a wish. Her name was Evelyn. Izuku nodded. I know it's not my place to ask the specifics of another person's wish, but why choose her name? Out of all the powerful people who came to see you, surely she couldn't have been the most memorable. Riven shook her head, and Izuku grimaced at how far her neck twisted when she did. Izuku interrupted her and shook his head normally, and the Ahamkara adapted. Nodding to herself, she huffed. This Dmed form is so difficult to maneuver in properly. Izuku laughed outright at that, running his hands through his hair. I'm sure that it's incredibly different to what you're used to, but someone with your experience should have no issue figuring it out soon enough. Riven seemed to almost preen at that, before continuing. Anyhow, you are incorrect, questioner mine. It is because she was powerless that she is memorable. She wished for something that none other had before and even survived paying the price for it. She was so different, so unlike the warlords and con men that sought my aid at the time. Izuku hummed, bouncing the necklace he was holding in his hand a few times. I see. Well, no matter the reason, it is a fine name. Now, I prepared this necklace for you earlier, when you requested my aid. He passed it over to her, and she quickly put it on, tucking it under the thick purple robes she was wearing. He still wasn't sure if they were actual clothes or just an extension of her shape-shifting. He had no intention of asking either. Izuku waved a hand at the portal to Riven's home, and it shut off immediately with a flex of his will. His hand stung a little from the magic, but he had gotten used to far worse pain many years ago. It is essentially a panic button for you to use. I know that you have been locked away in the Dreaming City for centuries now, and are most likely feeling restless now that I have given you a way to leave without detection. Izuku sighed as she started shaking her arms and legs, trying to get a feel for the human form. You will be stepping right into one of the most dangerous places for you right now. There will be guardians everywhere tonight. You will most likely end up talking with some tonight if you come as my guest. Pointing at the inscriptions on the necklace, Izuku touched his hand to it, and Riven was SCKED up into green and black smoke, appearing right in front of the shut-off portal, which activated instantly. When activated, this charm will instantly teleport you here, and activate the portal to your home for exactly 10 seconds. I allowed it to be activated by yourself as well if you feel that you're in some sort of danger that I am not aware of. As the portal turned off, Riven just grinned, and Izuku couldn't help but liken it to the snarl a predator gave its prey before the kill. Oh, this is excellent. It will please me greatly to know that I have fooled them completely, not even risking my life to do so, oh, protector mine. Izuku could tell that she was attempting to be somewhat sarcastic about that, but both of them knew that she was taking a big risk for both of them by coming to this party. Izuku would rather make up answers about why he teleported his guest away than answer questions about why he was consorting with an Ahamkara. Well, as long as we stay safe and try to have some fun, this night will be a success. One thing though, tone down the smile. People don't react well to feeling like prey. Evelyn chuckled to herself as she and Izuku walked into the tower's plaza, seeing people celebrating everywhere she turned. It had been literal centuries since she had been in the presence of this many people at one time, and it was oddly uncomfortable. Not only was she feeling a bit stiff from having to take the form of a human girl, but knowing that this many guardians in one place had the capability of almost effortlessly slaughtering her was disconcerting. Her stupid, five-fingered hand reached up to hover over the necklace her little human had made for her. It had been quite a while since anyone had done anything purely for her own benefit. The guardians, before they had started hunting her, had used her to topple rival tribes or gain more power or resources. The awoken queen protected her, but only because her wish-granting powers were a key part of Mara's plan. And maybe her little human had some ulterior motive, but for once in her long, long life, she wasn't able to say with certainty what exactly it could be. She had entertained the theory that he was using her desperation to escape her cage, and the dreaming city was a cage, just a gilded one, and hand her over to the guardians to curry favor. But as the night progressed and she and Izuku walked around the party, talking with the guardians who had assisted in holding back the Hive during the assault, and listened to the one that looked like they could be his older brother give a speech, he never once even insinuated that she was anything but a girl he had met while staying in the tower. Even the conversation she was forced to have with the blue, horned robot that had comforted Izuku after she had healed him was surprisingly pleasant, even amusing at times, as the guardian teased Izuku for her mere presence by his side. Eventually, as the sun rose up behind the traveler, the party seemed to wind down. Not because they were too tired to continue, she was sure, but because they all had things they needed to do, missions to complete and targets to hunt. Izuku had done most of the talking for them during the night, and she had played the part of the shy guest that's way over her head flawlessly, leaving her mostly to her people watching. It was the reason she had wanted to come in the first place. Being locked in the dreaming city had its benefits, ones that Riven had been enjoying for the last few centuries. But she had never been able to leave without Mara Sov knowing immediately before, which had essentially trapped her there if she didn't want guardians all over her without hesitation. But now? Now had gotten a taste of true, practically unadulterated freedom for the first time since the guardians started hunting her. And she was hungry for more. Izuku flopped onto his couch, mentally exhausted. He had performed literal headache-inducing rituals fueled by literal dark magic that had drained his energy less than spending all night talking to hundreds of people. If Mikumo had insisted that he make a speech as well, he was fairly certain he would have just teleported away. He was surprised when he felt Riven sit down next to him, putting her feet up on the table, her hands in her lap. Let her head hang over the back of the couch, and he could now see that her neck was just slightly longer than it should be. It was an uncomfortable image, to begin with, but it was coupled with his curiosity about what she was doing. So, did you get whatever it was that you wanted out of tonight? She glanced over his way, pulling her head back up to face him, before nodding slowly. Yes, I believe I did. And you were correct, oh, companion mine, my control over this form has increased significantly. Izuku smiled, nodding happily. Well, I don't know if you should, but you are welcome to sleep here if you wish. The couch folds out into a bed. I've just never had a guest to use it before. Riven shook her head. No, I cannot. And even if I could, I do not sleep as you do, so it would be pointless. I will return to the dreaming city, oh, helper mine. Izuku almost felt disappointed at that, but nodded, standing up and heading over to his study with her. With a wave of his hand, the portal opened. Riven's form shuddered, and Izuku watched, curious, as she morphed back into her dragon-like form. Riven's robes and necklace dropped to the floor as she did. Ha, so the clothes were actually clothes, good to know? He gave her a bow, picking up the necklace and throwing it after her through the portal. If you ever need my assistance with anything else, I would be glad to help out. Her head dipped slightly, and Izuku took that as acknowledgement. He waved his hand, closing the portal again. He sighed, rubbing his eyes as he pulled his shirt off, heading to bed. He was way more tired than he had expected, and he still had work to do tomorrow. Flopping down onto his bed, he wrapped himself in his covers and felt the pull of sleep quickly. As he closed his eyes for the last time of the night, he swore he heard something whisper in his ears. "Sleep well, oh, friend mine. You have earned a debt this day. So, kiddo, you have to tell me the story about that girl last night." Izuku blinked as Cade wrapped his arm around his shoulder, pulling him into a side hug. They had just finished a set of drills in the practice area of the Crucible, where Guardians usually went to train if they didn't feel like dying over and over. It was the best place for him, mainly because he couldn't come back from the dead yet. He mentally scrambled to remember the various bits of the cover story he had created on the fly during the party last night. Feigning ignorance, Izuku ped his head to the side. "What do you mean?" Shax laughed, and Izuku could practically feel the vibrations of the laughter in his own chest. "Come now, Izuku. You had one of the prettiest girls in the last city on your arm last night, as if she popped out of thin air. There must be a story." He thanked the universe for Shax's flowery way of speaking, as it had given him time to put all of the details of his story together. "Ah, yes. Evelyn is someone I met while hanging around Banshee's workshop." The two Guardians nodded, motioning for Izuku to continue. He smiled at their enthusiasm. "She isn't a Guardian, but she is a budding gunsmith and wanted to talk to Banshee about an apprenticeship opportunity. I doubt he'd remember her by now, though." Cade hummed, shaking his head slowly. "Yeah, Banshee. 44 reboots is a lot. More than any other EXO we know of. I've only had 6 reboots and I'm still foggy on most of the details of my life. Can't imagine he's got much data in the old banks." Shax put his hand on Cade's shoulder, in what seemed to be a comforting gesture to Izuku, before suddenly turning his head to face him. "An excellent verbal parry, Izuku. But you've yet to gain my experience, with physical or mental combat." Cade jolted, pointing an accusatory finger at Izuku. "Hey! You distracted me with my empathy to get out of spilling the beans." Izuku nodded, not finding any reason to deny it, and let out a small yell as Cade rushed forward, wrapping the boy up in a hug, fake crying. "You sneaky little sheet. I'm so proud of you." Something about Cade, one of his primary male role models, saying that he was proud of him pushed a memory button from before in Izuku's head. Coughing as he felt his throat tighten up, he exited the hug and cleared his throat. "Anyway, Evelyn and I got to talking after Banshee spaced out halfway through explaining that he didn't take apprentices, and I may have shared my notes on his gear with her. She was grateful, so we went and had lunch, and when we got back from the Hellmouth, she asked if she could come to the party and I said yes." Shax laughed boisterously, slapping Izuku on the back. "I see, do not worry, neither of us will be dobbying you in. I've done far more than sharing some notes to win the affection of a lady." Izuku shook his head. "I wasn't trying to win her affection. She wanted help, and I was able to help. Plus, with more high-quality gunsmiths, Guardians will have better gear, and do better. And when Guardians do better, we all do, right?" Cade nodded. "I don't believe you on that first bit, but I'll drop it for now so we can go back to training. I do want to meet her again, though. She was quiet, but she was pretty fun." Izuku chuckled softly. "Oh, don't worry. I have a feeling we'll be seeing her more often from now on. Greetings, oh, companion mine." Izuku nodded to Riven Evelyn as she stepped out of the portal in his study, and shut it down after she had crossed over fully. She took another look around, and Izuku marveled at how proficient she seemed with her human body now. Or at least, he did, until she stumbled, her legs crossing over each other, and he had to create a portal and catch her to stop her from falling flat on her face. "Are you alright? This blasted form is infuriating. How can you live like this, with your spindly limbs?" She untangled her legs and planted her feet on the ground. Izuku chuckled as he let go of her now that she had stabilized. "I'm going to take that as a yes. What can I do for you, Riven?" She shook her shoulders and turned to face him. "You can do nothing for me this day, oh, helper mine." Confused, Izuku frowned, hands coming together to fidget with a small green flame. "I see. Then may I ask why you are here?" Riven smiled wickedly, her grin still looking like a predator's. She had apparently chosen to ignore his advice about smiles when her cover wasn't on the line. She walked out into the doorway between the study and the lounge room. "My queen has detected some interesting activity in her reef and has thought of an even more interesting plan. I thought you might like to be privy to it." Izuku raised an eyebrow, and followed her out, flopping down onto the opposite end of the couch that she sat on. "This won't cost me a wish or anything, will it?" Riven laughed, which sounded creepy and weird in her not quite instred human body. but less creepy than hearing wizards and knights shuffle around your hiding place in the tunnels of the Hellmouth. For information, your Vanguard would give you in a few days' time anyway? No, think of this as a favor, not a wish. Izuku frowned, crossing his arms as he pulled his feet up onto the couch. I do trust you, but is it safe for me to owe you a favor? Will I still get some sort of backlash for this? Izuku was kind of surprised at the annoyed look on Riven's human face as he said that. No, questioner mine, there is no backlash. You are aware my entire existence is not based on my ability to grant wishes, yes? Izuku's eyes widened as he realized that he had just insulted a wish-granting super dragon that was in his house. No, of course it's not. I'm sorry if I insinuated that it was, truly. Riven raised her chin at him, an aloof look on her face. You are forgiven for your insult. Do not allow it to happen again. Now, do you want this information or not? Izuku nodded, sitting up and opening a portal next to him, reaching through and grabbing his datapad and opening the notes function. Yes, please. I would be glad to hear it. She gave him a look that pretty much said, you're overdoing it, and sighed, but she started speaking either way. In 5 days, Queen Mara SOV of the Awoken will be opening up the reef to the Guardians, to hire them to quell a bit of an insurrection. Izuku wrote it down, his eyes wide as he realized how big this was. According to Riven and the Guardians, the Awoken Queen hadn't opened up the reef since the Dark Ages, when it was first being created. He frowned, worry starting to grow in his chest. What kind of insurrection could be so dangerous that she would lift the ban on outsiders entering the reef after so long? The Elixney House of Wolves, and a new Kell of Kells, liberator mine. Izuku hummed at that. He knew what the Elixney were, he'd actually met one during his time in the Hellmouth, a dreg by the name of Hirux, but his explanation of their society had been fairly lacking since he had been super young. And because of that, didn't know much about the Elixney, or the Fallen, as humanity called them. I must admit I don't know as much about the Elixney as I'd like to. Would you please care to explain what the Kell of Kells is? Riven seemed to preen at the question, a smug smile forming on her face. I would indeed, student mine. Listen well. Hellmouth, 5 years prior. Izuku crawled through a small tunnel, the torch he had stolen almost completely dim now that it was out of its socket on the wall. It was weird to him that a supposedly magic flame could go out just because it wasn't plugged into the wall, but he was 9 years old and only just starting to grasp the fact that magic existed. He pushed against the rock he had set up at the end of the small tunnel to block off one of his safe rooms, the thick slab landing on a pile of thrall skin to stop it from letting out a loud noise that could reveal this spot to the patrolling Hive. He pulled his backpack through the hole after him and moved over to the wall, plugging his torch back into a wall socket he had stolen a few years ago. The flame flared to life again almost instantly, illuminating the room with soft green light. Screech! Izuku pulled out his hand cannon as he spun around to face the noise, the tip of the barrel slamming into something. It was only because he saw the 4 blue eyes, so different to those of the Hive, that he didn't pull the trigger. The small creature in front of him had gray skin, 4 glowing blue eyes, and what looked like 2 metal tubes sticking out of its back. Pushing it backwards with his hand cannon, Izuku stood up and glared at it. What are you and why are you in my safe spot? The creature made bug-like chittering sounds as it waved its arms around. Right, it probably couldn't understand him when he spoke Japanese. What about? What are you, and why are you in my safe spot? The creature jolted as Izuku spoke the Hive's language. He couldn't really even explain how he knew it himself, it just seemed to come to him the more he heard it. The creature took a step back, hitting the wall, and crouched down slightly. I am Elixney, yes? You are, human. Young human, small human, weak human. How are you living? Izuku frowned, squinting at the creature. No, the Elixney. I am alive because I am sneaky, and have set up many safe spots. This is one. You are an intruder. The Elixney fell to his knees, and patted the ground with his hands, something that even Izuku could recognize was a sign of surrender. I will not fight. Please do not shoot. I am young Elixney, small Elixney, weak Elixney, a dreg. We are joined in Hellmouth, with nothing but Hive. Why kill one another? Izuku paused at that. Why was he so ready to execute someone who was in pretty much the same situation as he was? And the Elixney was right, he wasn't even any bigger than Izuku was, in fact, it looked like he was smaller. What is your name? The Elixney seemed surprised at his continued existence and raised its head from the floor to meet Izuku's eyes. It is Hirux. Hirux, of House Exile. Or, formerly of House Exile. I have been lost to them since I was stranded here. Izuku nodded, his hands a little shaky as he holstered his hand cannon. Hirux seemed surprised at that, and when Izuku motioned for him to get back up, he did so. Izuku stuck out his hand, and while Hirux flinched at the movement, he didn't attack. Izuku felt a smile form on his face as he held his hand out. Helping someone out like this, would his mum be proud of him? Would All Might approve? He hoped so. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Humans don't really have houses where I'm from. Hirux let out a small chittering noise that Izuku recognized as laughter, and clasped Izuku's hands with both of his own. It is great pleasure to meet you, houseless Izuku Midoriya. May this be the start of great friendship, yes? Izuku sat in his study, contemplating all that Riven had told him. The Kell of Kells. According to Riven, it was the ultimate title for an Elixney, the pinnacle of their race, above all others. When he had asked for an explanation in less poetic terms, she had described to him something that was essentially the same as what most people thought when they said, King of the World. It basically just meant that they were the King of Kings. Actually, Leader of Leaders would probably be a more correct translation. He wondered why Hirux had never mentioned it to him, but then again, Hirux was incredibly young and probably didn't have any expectations of ever ruling the Elixney after falling into the Hellmouth. All this talk of Elixney had him wanting to see him again, really. If only. Thud. 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 Kiddo? You in there? The voice was dim, mainly because there were two doors in the way, but Izuku's enhanced senses flicked towards where the front door would be from where he was as Cade spoke. He moved to the door and opened it, motioning for Cade to come in. Good morning, Cade. I'd ask if you slept well, but... Cade chuckled. No worries about that, kiddo. Now, I have a question for you. How would you like to participate in a bit of a hunt that I've got going on? Izuku ped his head to the side, wondering what he could be referring to. Was he talking about Skolas and the House of Wolves? That depends. Am I not still meant to be recovering from my fight in the Hellmouth? Cade froze for a second, before adjusting to posture back into the relaxed pose he had taken. Well, I mean, yeah, technically. But you heal faster than most, and your energy regens quick, right? Izuku nodded slowly. He knew what he meant when he said energy and appreciated his discreetness, at least the attempt at it. Really, anyone that knew he lived in this apartment was someone that probably already knew what he could do. You would be correct. I am currently in fighting shape, but I was going to respect the wishes of the Vanguard. Have those wishes changed? Cade laughed, but Izuku could tell it was the awkward kind of laugh he did when he felt guilty. Well, no. Not exactly. Zavala and Ikora aren't really aware of this offer, but hey, I'm the Hunter Vanguard, so it's not like I need their approval to offer this. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the EXO. Of course not, but, and I mean this as nicely as I can, you're not exactly the most responsible member of the Vanguard. He gasped, his hand going over his chest, where a human's heart would be. Gah! I come here and offer you a spot on my squad, and you insult me so? Izuku just shook his head, a smile appearing on his face. We both know what I said is valid, Cade. Now, I would like to accompany you, actually, but I will be telling Zavala and Ikora, Aerys, and the speaker first. I will not permit a misunderstanding of my whereabouts leading to a question of my loyalty. Cade sighed, dropping down a bit. Fine, fine. We'll tell the others about us sneaking off to hunt Fallen, geez. Do you think that you're ready to be going out so soon? Izuku was sitting on a cushioned bench in a large cylindrical room, with the speaker sitting next to him, his hands occupied with a puzzle shaped like an exotic engram. Izuku leaned up against the wall, his new hand tucked into the pockets of a dead orbit hoodie. I believe that I am, yes. The speaker nodded to themselves, and the puzzle they were fiddling with clicked into place. One of the sides popped open, revealing a small purple crystal. He chuckled, putting the solved puzzle on a nearby shelf, and handed the small crystal over to Izuku. Then, are you here to ask my permission? Izuku ped his head to the side, not really understanding. Well, yes? You speak not only for the traveler, but for the lightless as well, and I'm not a guardian. Aren't you in charge of me? The speaker outright laughed at that, catching glances from a few of the people walking by, guardians or otherwise. Izuku frowned, now a little confused. My boy, I am not so much in charge as I am respected. I am a political figure, yes, but I am in no way a king or a ruler. He sighed, shaking his head. Placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his head moved slightly, and Izuku could tell that he was likely smiling under his mask. I have a say in things, just like everyone else on the council, or even the last city. Izuku frowned but nodded his head. Yes, I believe I get it. My old world worked similarly, I think. They called it, democracy? The speaker chuckled again, patting his shoulder once before removing it. I believe you are looking for the word democracy. I know that where you grew up, as it were, the rules were very different. But strength does not grant the right to command, here. At least, not directly. He patted Izuku on the back. So if you want to go, and believe that it is safe for you to do so, then you have my blessing, not my permission. He then stood up, motioning for Izuku to do the same. Now, it has been lovely speaking with you, Izuku, but there are a great many things I am required for today, and I must begin my work. Izuku nodded, bowing slightly. Thank you, Speaker. I may not be one of the travelers chosen or even one of the lightless it protects, but you have treated me well all the same. I will leave you to your duties. The speaker nodded back slowly, before turning and greeting a guardian who had come sprinting up to them and had been dancing just out of earshot for the last few minutes, repeating the same moves over and over again. Izuku made his way out of the speaker's area quickly, making sure that his arm was fully covered. Cade made eye contact with Zavala as he put his elbows on the table, his fingers interlocking. Are you sure, Cade? Both Ikora and Aerys sat nearby while Cade stood at the end of the table, swirling a knife around his finger. Am I sure the kid can be trusted? Hell yeah I am. Look, I get it, he's odd. And he's not exactly our regular customer, but he's human, and he hates the Hive. How can you still distrust him after Crota? Ikora raised her head, sighing. I hope for the best, of course, but we cannot be sure that his intentions are entirely pure, Cade. His actions in the Hellmouth that day might have been crucial to our victory, but we cannot forget that he gained a great deal of power from Crota's defeat. That would be incentive enough. Aerys scoffed, her green crystal glowing brighter for a moment as the woman spoke. Both of you are fools if that is all that you are basing your suspicions on. Zavala turned to Aerys, narrowing his eyes at her. Care to elaborate, Aerys? Cade flinched slightly at the cold tone in Zavala's voice, looking to Aerys, who was sitting up straight, a blank look on her face. My friends, everyone in that fire team became stronger because of that fight. The unthinking one's growth was only noticeable because of his low starting point. Ikora raised an eyebrow, turning to face Aerys completely. What do you mean by that? Guardians do not work on the same rules that the Hive do. Cade frowned. This was a major tangent from him telling them he was taking Izuku out with him, but Aerys' words were intriguing. He saw Aerys smile at Ikora. Of course not, but the mighty Hydras grew stronger from that fight nonetheless. The defeat of an enemy brings many things. The collection of new, more powerful armor, more devastating weapons, and finally, the strengthening of the soul. The Hive has perfected this sword logic, and the unthinking one uses it as well, just modified with his own personal touch. Aerys stood up, stepping away from her chair and looking at Cade. But just because they have perfected it does not mean that it does not exist for every other being in the universe. The darkness existence makes its logic real, just as the traveler makes our own. She rolled her shoulders. So, friends, if the only reason you suspect the unthinking one is that he grew stronger from the fight, then yes, you are fools. I am leaving, now. Take care of him, Cade 6. Cade just nodded dumbly as Aerys strode out of the room, before turning to glance at Ikora and Zavala, who seemed stunned. He inhaled deeply, and then clapped his hands together, walking back towards the door, shooting finger guns their way in an attempt to dissipate some of the tension in the room. Alrighty then. I'll just be, going now, and don't worry. I'll have the kid back in time for dinner.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.